Chapter 729. Nye Tian, have you thought it through? Are you sure you want to challenge me? The Holy Light Ancestor stared at Nye Tian, his eyes burning with a strange light. He could sense determination and fearlessness in Nye Tian's eyes. To be able to show such determination in the face of a warrior who was far stronger than he was, it meant that Nye Tian was a man of great perseverance. With such a temperament and heaven-defying talent, Nye Tian's future was limitless. Given enough time, he would definitely become an expert who stood at the peak of the martial Tao. Nye Tian looked at the Holy Light Ancestor straight in the eye. His eyes were firm and calm, and he nodded. He did not want to challenge the Holy Light Ancestor on a whim. He had considered many things. First, he had to make the Holy Light Ancestor feel pressured in order to ensure Nyeiro's safety. Second, challenging a top cultivator was also an incentive for Nye Tian. Third, and most importantly, Nye Tian wanted to show Qianlong Yingjing and the others that there was someone powerful behind Nyeiro. The killing intent that had flashed across Qianlong Yingjing's eyes just now had disappeared, but Nye Tian had sensed it clearly. Nyeiro was Mo Rushi from 2 years ago, and Qianlong Yingjing was Mou. If he did not pressure Qianlong Yingjing, Nyeiro's return to the Holy Light Dynasty would be extremely dangerous. Very well. The Holy Light Ancestor laughed. Nye Tian, I will wait for you at the Holy Light platform in 3 years. Let's have a showdown. Everyone gasped when they heard what the Holy Light Great Ancestor had said. No one had expected him to agree, and in such a serious manner at that. This undoubtedly meant that in the Holy Light Ancestor's eyes, Nye Tian was qualified to challenge him. Judging from his reaction, he even saw Nye Tian as a real opponent. It was surprising that the Holy Light Ancestor thought so highly of Nye Tian. Patriarch, you agreed to his challenge? Qianlong Ying stared at the Holy Light Patriarch in shock. Qianlong Yingjing would never have believed that the Patriarch of Holy Light would take Nye Tian's challenge seriously if he hadn't seen it with his own eyes and heard it with his own ears. Patriarch Holy Light took a look at Qianlong Yingjing and said, Yingjing, you're talented, and you've inherited the bloodline power of the divine incarcerate black flame. But compared to Nye Tian, your talent is far inferior. And your temperament is not even a tenth of his. He didn't challenge you, not because he looks down on you, but because you are indeed not qualified to be his opponent. I dare say that there's no need for 3 years. As long as he has 2 years, or even 1 year, he will be able to reach the Deva realm. At that time, you definitely won't be his match. His words were like steel needles stabbing into Qianlong's heart. He was the crown prince of the Sacred Light Sky dynasty, the person who would become the emperor in the future. He was the most talented genius of the Qianlong family in the past 300 years, the leader of the 9 demons of the Sumer world. But now, he was belittled. His talent was inferior, his temperament was inferior, and he was not even qualified to be an opponent of a warrior from a lower world. If these words were spoken by someone else, Qianlong Yingjing would definitely think that it was nonsense and kill that person on the spot. However, these words came from the mouth of the Holy Light Ancestor. The Holy Light Ancestor was the person he respected the most, the person he saw as his goal. The Holy Light Ancestor's words were more important to Qianlong Yingjing than anyone else's. At some point, Qianlong Yingjing's eyes met Nye Tian's. The latter's indifferent expression made him feel inexplicably angry. The anger in his heart was expressed in his eyes, which became vicious and vicious. The Holy Light Ancestor's original intention was to use Nye Tian to motivate Qianlong Yingjing, but he didn't expect that Qianlong would completely misunderstand and hate Nye Tian even more. The inner demon of martial arts. The Holy Light Ancestor caught all of Qianlong Yingjing's reactions and let out a long sigh. On the path of martial arts, the most taboo was the inner demon. Once the inner demon was born, it would inevitably affect the martial arts heart of a warrior. At this time, Qianlong Yingjing's inner demon was born, which was Nye Tian. If he couldn't completely defeat Nye Tian, it would be impossible to get rid of the inner demon of Qianlong Yingjing. The Holy Light Ancestor shook his head slightly, extremely disappointed with Qianlong Yingjing's performance. Fortunately, there was another person in the Qianlong family who had awakened the Qianlong Phantom Seal. In this way, Qianlong Yingjing's position as the Crown Prince was no longer necessary. The Holy Light Ancestor didn't want to pay any more attention to Qianlong Yingjing. He looked at Nye Tian and said, "Nye Tian, I agree to your 2 requests. Now, hand over the Princess of the Holy Light Empire." His voice was calm, but with an inviolable dominance. Nye Tian was a little stunned. His eyes trembled violently as he looked at Qiushan on the ground. Qiushan's figure flickered and appeared beside Nye Tian. Nye Tian took Nyeyuro. Looking at the little face that was still sleeping, his eyes couldn't help but tremble. He looked at Nyeyuro for a long time without saying anything. "Nye Tian, hand over the princess to me." The Holy Light Ancestor's figure flickered and came to less than 5 meters away from Nye Tian. "Wait!" At this moment a clear voice rang out. Shortly after, a massive figure appeared in the sky at an unbelievable speed. The Holy Light Ancestor frowned when he saw a spirit beast that looked like a bear not far away. On it sat a girl about 16 or 17 years old. Ling-er. Nye Tian turned around and saw Qiu Ling-er and Pishio Guai. At this time, Guai had become Big Guai. Its body was 6 or 7 meters tall. Although it had no wings, it could stand in the air, surrounded by a faint halo. "Big brother Nye Tian, I want to go with Ro. Is that okay?" Qiu Ling-er said lightly, her delicate face looking stubborn. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed. Of course, he understood what Qiu Ling-er meant. She was worried about Ro-er's safety, so she chose to go with Nyeyuro. "Sir, let Ling-er and Ro-er go with you," Qiushan said at this time. Nye Tian thought for a moment and nodded. If Qiu Ling-er went with Nyeyuro, the 2 of them could look after each other. It couldn't be better. At this time, Nye Tian looked at the Holy Light Ancestor and said lightly, "This girl will go back to the Holy Light Empire with 9th sister. I want you to guarantee that her status is equal to that of a princess." "Okay, I promise you." The Holy Light Ancestor looked at Qiu Ling-er and agreed without hesitation. Nye Tian nodded and looked at Qianlong Yingjing. He said seriously, "In 3 years, I will go to the Holy Light Empire to find them. If anything happens to either of them, I will make the Qianlong family pay in blood." "Nye Tian, are you threatening the Holy Light Empire?" Qianlong Yingjing roared. He was not a fool. Of course, he could tell that Nye Tian's words were directed at him. "This is not a threat. This is a promise." Nye Tian glanced at Qianlong Yingjing and then at the Holy Light Ancestor. He said coldly, "You are a smart man. I hope you won't do anything that will make me regret." After that, Nye Tian handed Nyeyuro to Qiu Ling-er, ignoring the Holy Light Ancestor's reaction. Chapter 730. Nye Tian reminded Qiu Ling-er to be careful of Qianlong and Yingjing. Then, Nye Tian gave the Violet Wind Jade sword to Qiu Ling-er to keep for Nyeyuro. Nye Tian had taken the sword from the Long family and was now giving it to Nyeyuro. A moment later, the Holy Light Patriarch and the others activated the spacetime teleportation formation. Qiu Ling-er and Nyeyuro stood in the formation and disappeared with a blinding white light. Nye Tian stood where he was and looked at the sky, speechless. Several days later, Nye Tian walked out of his room in the courtyard of the Tianluo City Lord's residence. His figure was as sharp as a sword. After several days of hard training, Nye Tian had completely stabilized his first level of heavenly evolution. Generally speaking, after a martial artist ascended to a new level, they had to train hard. This process was very long, sometimes taking months or even years. But Nye Tian was different. He had the deepest understanding of all the levels below the heavenly Emperor realm. Therefore, after ascending to a new level, he only needed to stabilize it. Nyeyuro woke up, but she was taken away by the Holy Light dynasty. Nye Tian and Emo Rushi's marriage could only be put on hold. When Nye Tian arrived at the hall of the Lord's residence, Qiu Shan and the others had been waiting for a long time. Qiu Shan, how are the preparations for the vitality vein of the earth? Nye Tian asked directly. Qiu Shan nodded respectfully and replied, Sir, everything is ready. The location of the vitality vein of the earth has been determined, and all the materials for the formation have been transported. The Formation Master Guild has also agreed to cooperate. 12 Rank 4 Formation Masters are all on standby. Very good. Nye Tian nodded in satisfaction. He looked at Sun Hai and smiled. Mr. Sun, let's go. In these few days, Nye Tian let Qiu Shan be in charge of the vitality vein of the earth, and the latter did very well. Everything had been settled. All that was left was for Nye Tian and the others to go to Hengduan Mountain. Nye Tian led the people of the Lord's residence onto the four-winged griffin. 3 days later, the griffin landed on a high peak in the Hengduan mountain range. At this moment, there were many people gathered on the peak. Most of them were from the Tang family, the Lu family, and the Spirit Array Masters from the Spirit Array Master Guild. Nye Tian and the others dismounted from the griffin. The air was filled with dense heaven and earth spiritual energy. There was actually a layer of spiritual energy mist in the air. The heaven and earth spiritual energy here was more than 10 times denser than other places. It really is an essence chi earth vein. Nye Tian sensed the heaven and earth spiritual energy in the air and looked at the mountainous terrain around him. The corners of his mouth curled up. The heaven and earth ling chi in the air was only emitted from the yuan chi earth vein. The real heaven and earth ling chi was under the ground, just like a glacier, only a small part of it was exposed. Mr. Sun, what do you think? Nye Tian glanced at Sun Hai beside him and smiled faintly. Sun Hai's attention was not focused on the essence chi earth vein. Instead, he was looking at the peak of the mountain. There was a dark cloud gathered there. From afar, it looked like a mountain range floating in the air. Time and space have been compressed to the point of deforming. That's where the time and space boundary is. Nye Tian followed Sun Hai's gaze and was shocked. Sun Hai nodded and said, Mr. Nye, how long do you need to refine the spirit assimilation formation? Nye Tian looked at the mountain range in front of him and thought for a moment. He said, at least half a month. All right. Sun Hai agreed and said, this time and space boundary doesn't cover a large area. I can transform the boundary into a tunnel that leads to the Sumeru world. However, the entire tunnel is one way. It can only lead from the lower world to the Sumeru world. Can't lead from the Sumeru world to the lower world. That's what I want. The corners of Nye Tian's mouth twitched. He was very satisfied. As they spoke, the two arrived at the edge of the essence chi earth vein. Nye Tian. At this moment, a figure walked up and looked at Nye Tian with a gloomy expression. He called out his name in a hoarse voice. President Ji. Nye Tian smiled faintly and looked at the person in front of him. It was the president of the Spirit Array Guild, Ji Wuxiu. There was a deep hatred between Ji Wuxiu and Nye Tian. His grandson, Ji Tinghai, was killed by Nye Tian. Ji Tinghai was the hope of the Ji family's rise, but he was killed by Nye Tian. Ji Wuxiu's hatred towards Nye Tian could be imagined. The reason why the Spirit Array Guild agreed to help this time was because of the pressure from the 4 aristocratic families and the Alchemist Association. On the other hand, it was because Ji Wuxiu wanted to see what Nye Tian wanted to do. Elder Nye, are these the materials you need to refine the Spirit Array? Ji Wuxiu pointed at the spiritual materials that were piled up into a mountain and asked coldly. His eyes were filled with disdain. Not far from Nye Tian's group, there were hundreds of spiritual materials piled up into a small mountain. Most of them were grade 6 spiritual materials and were extremely precious. Ji Wuxiu didn't know where Nie Tian got so many spiritual materials from. Even the Spirit Array Guild couldn't take out so many spiritual materials at once. However, this wasn't Ji Wuxiu's focus. He was more interested in how Nie Tian was going to refine the Spirit Array. Even a top-notch spirit formation master might not be able to control hundreds of spiritual materials. In Ji Wuxiu's opinion, it was impossible to fuse so many spiritual materials together. Ji Wuxiu was the #1 spirit array master in the 3000 small world. The spirit arrays that he had refined only used 40 or so spiritual materials at most. Was Nie Tian joking about using hundreds of spiritual materials to refine a spirit array? The process of refining a spirit array was similar to refining a spirit pill. They both needed to refine and fuse spiritual materials or herbs. The requirements for a spirit array master to fuse hundreds of spiritual materials with different attributes were very high. If there was even the slightest mistake in the process, the spirit array would completely fail. The Tao of spirit arrays was even more complicated than Tao of alchemy. The power of the spirit array and the circulation of runes were interconnected. There was no room for negligence. The spiritual materials are simple and crude. I'm sorry to make you laugh, President Ji. Of course, Nie Tian knew what Ji Wuxiu was thinking, but he smiled faintly and deliberately provoked him. Nie Tian's mental energy had reached rank 70, which was very terrifying. However, it was impossible for him to refine the spirit assimilation formation alone, so he needed the help of other spirit array masters. Nie Tian's words made Ji Wuxiu and the spirit array masters behind him roar with laughter. There were hundreds of grade 6 spiritual materials, but Nie Tian said they were simple and crude. Wasn't this the biggest joke in the world? Nie Tian glanced at Ji Wuxiu and the spirit array masters behind him, but didn't explain anything. A few hundred spiritual materials were indeed simple and crude. In his previous life, he had seen great spirit array masters use thousands of spiritual materials to refine a spirit array. That was truly shocking. Compared to those who were at the peak of spirit arrays, Nie Tian was far inferior. Nie Tian, you boast to the heavens. I'd like to see how you're going to refine a spirit array. Ji Wuxiu smiled sinisterly, waiting to see Nie Tian make a fool of himself. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth pulled up into a cold smile, and he ignored Ji Wuxiu and the others. Teacher. At this moment a familiar figure appeared. It was Zhang Yifeng. Chapter 731. Zhang Yifeng had won the alchemist competition at the Summer Festival and was now an honorary red-robed elder of the Alchemist Guild. He had also been cultivating on the core soul stone for a month. In less than a month, Nie Tian had Zhang Yifeng end it early. Master, I've brought the dragon pattern cauldron. Zhang Yifeng took a step forward and handed it over. All right. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, I'll be using the dragon pattern pill cauldron to forge the grand spell formation this time. I'll leave some spell formations in the dragon pattern pill cauldron for you to study. I'm sure you'll make great achievements in the Tao of spell formations in the future. Disciple thanks Master. Zhang Yifeng was moved and bowed deeply. Ji Wuxiu and the others sneered at him, thinking that Nie Tian was bragging. It was already incredible for an 18-year-old boy to have extraordinary attainments in both martial arts and alchemy. How could he also have attainments in formations? Nie Tian ignored them. He held the dragon pattern cauldron in one hand and strode forward. A moment later, Tang Hao, Lu Jinghong, and the others appeared. Mr. Nie, the materials are ready. When will you start the formation? Lu Jinghong asked respectfully to Nie Tian. He also wanted to see exactly how grand the legendary spirit assimilation formation was. Nie Tian nodded slightly. Looking at the pile of materials in front of him, he took a deep breath and said with a plain tone, Let's start. With a leap, Nie Tian flew to the top of the mountain under countless gazes. Nie Tian raised his arm. The dragon pattern cauldron flew out and floated in the air. Everyone looked at the figure in the sky and held their breath, not daring to breathe too loudly. Nye Tian exhaled deeply. The 9 heavenly fire spell started to operate. Endless yuan qi surged out and turned into the 9 heavenly fire. Beneath the dragon mark pill cauldron, the Li fire was surging and the heat waves were rolling. Balls of scarlet flames rose and the space within a few hundred meters turned into a huge furnace. In this furnace, even steel would melt in an instant. Hiss! The crowd gasped when they saw this, especially the spiritual array masters and alchemists, who were dumbfounded. Directly condensing elemental energy into flames, and in such a terrifying manner at that. Nye Tian's control over flames had reached the acme of perfection. The 9 heavenly fire was also very strange. It was wild and did not dissipate. It was completely absorbed by the dragon pattern pill cauldron. It was evident that Nye Tian's flame control art was of a very high level. There were many similarities between alchemy and spiritual arrays. Nye Tian's attainments in the Tao of spiritual arrays were not at the peak, but his control over flames was at the peak. Not to mention these people in front of him, even in the heaven realm's god realm, Nye Tian's fire control technique could be ranked in the top 10. A moment later, the dragon mark pill cauldron became scorching hot. The rolling flames soared tens of meters into the sky, incomparably gorgeous. Nye Tian formed hand seals with one hand, controlling the flames to condense without dissipating. Following which, the power of lightning surged out, and the flames in the air actually slowly transformed into a fire dragon surging with the power of lightning. So terrifying! When the crowd of spiritual array masters saw this scene, they were all astonished and exclaimed out loud. Nye Tian was too terrifying. He could actually mix the power of another attribute into the flames, and perfectly fuse the two types of power. It was really strange. Sun Hai was also stunned by the sight. He stared blankly for a long time, unable to say a word. He had only seen such a superb fire control technique from the Shumi world's #1 alchemist. Who exactly was Nye Tian? How could he be so terrifying? Nye Tian stood tall in the air, the power of lightning surging around his body. The flames circled around his body, but they could not harm him in the slightest. He maintained the lightning fire dragon. Following which, the fire dragon spat out 12 bolts of lightning fire, landing in 12 directions around the dragon mark pill cauldron. 12 4th-rank spiritual array masters, please stand in the direction of the flames. The spiritual absorption array is about to open. Nye Tian's mighty voice sounded. Following which, countless flames surged, as if they had a life of their own, madly growing in different directions. A moment later, the lightning fire formed the outline of the array, and a weak but powerful array power spread out. Everyone felt their minds shake, and they all retreated hundreds of meters away. The 12 spiritual array masters looked at each other, their eyes flashing with sharp light. They could feel the grandeur of the spiritual absorption array. Being able to participate in the creation of such a spiritual array would be of great help to their understanding of the Tao of spiritual arrays. The 12 figures immediately split up and appeared in 12 directions. Nye Tian nodded heavily. He raised his arm, and hundreds of spiritual materials floated up at the same time. Nye Tian closed his eyes. His divine sense was like an invisible giant hand, sensing the attributes of each spiritual material. Then, he divided them into 12 portions and sent them to the 12 spiritual array masters. Start refining the spiritual materials. Nye Tian suddenly opened his eyes and shouted in a deep voice. Yes. The 12 spiritual array masters answered in unison. They all took out their pill cauldrons. Flames rose, and the spiritual materials entered the cauldrons. Waves of spiritual energy floated in the air. Ji Wuxiu was dumbfounded. He couldn't believe that someone could create a spiritual array like this. He looked at Nye Tian, and the resentment in his eyes gradually turned into infatuation, respect, and admiration. Nie Tian stood in midair, and the origin energy around him surged to maintain the operation of the spiritual array. A few hours later, the 12 spiritual array masters successfully refined the first batch of spiritual materials. 12 balls of spiritual liquid appeared in the air. They were crystal clear, and spiritual energy shot into the sky. Nie Tian opened his slightly closed eyes. Flames surged out of his body and turned into a giant hand. He swept the 12 balls of spiritual liquid into the flames. And what is he doing? Seeing this, Sun Hai, Ji Wuxiu, and the others' eyes suddenly widened, and their faces were full of disbelief. Those were 12 balls of spiritual liquid with different attribute. Nie Tian was collecting them at the same time. Was he going to merge them all together? The spiritual liquid had different attributes, and their powers countered each other. If they were forcefully merged, something big would happen. This was the most basic knowledge. Didn't Nie Tian know? Sun Hai and Ji Wuxiu's eyes were wide open, and they didn't even dare to breathe. Nie Tian controlled the 12 balls of spiritual liquid and merged them all into the body of the lightning and fire dragons. Power of the stars, go! Nie Tian murmured in his heart. The realm zone origin array in his body activated, and a majestic power of the stars flowed into the lightning and fire dragons. Then, the power of the stars on Nie Tian's body exploded. Strands of power surrounded the lightning and fire dragons, and turned into star soul flames. Boom! 12 balls of spiritual liquid, 12 different powers, collided with each other. The lightning and fire dragons became furious, and the flames went wild, shooting into a fire pillar that was dozens of meters tall. Danger! The crowd's eyes trembled, and they shouted in unison. 12 different powers collided with each other. It was terrifying. Almost at the same time, the star soul flames around the lightning and fire dragons formed layers of shield. The power of the stars merged into the violent flames, and the flames gradually stabilized. A moment later, the 12 balls of spiritual liquid slowly merged into one, and became a ball of fiery red spiritual liquid, surging with a rich spiritual aura. Hoo! Nie Tian let out a long breath, and wiped the beads of sweat off his forehead. He raised his arm, and the ball of fiery red spiritual liquid turned into a ray of red light, and entered the flames of the spiritual array. Suddenly, a powerful aura of the spiritual array spread out, and it spread out for thousands of meters. Nie Tian successfully merged the 12 balls of spiritual liquid and turned them into the power of the spiritual array. The whole process was smooth, and there was not the slightest bit of delay. Chapter 732. Sun Hai, Ji Wuxiu, and the other spirit array masters looked at the figure in the sky with shock and admiration. Especially Sun Hai, his view of Nie Tian changed once again. He had seen many spirit array masters, alchemy masters, and blacksmithing masters, but in terms of proficiency in flame control, there was no one else in the entire Shimi world who could reach Nie Tian's level. The shock that Nie Tian brought to Sun Hai was too great. The ability that a youth displayed surpassed those old monsters who had cultivated for hundreds of years. It was really incredible. Nie Tian stood in the sky with a calm expression, but he let out a long sigh of relief. Nie Tian took a huge risk to merge 12 different types of spirit liquids at once. He first used the devouring power of the stars to weaken the conflict between the 12 types of spirit liquids, and then successfully merged them. The power of the stars far exceeded Nie Tian's imagination. He vaguely felt that as long as the power of the stars in his body was awakened enough, he could even change the attributes of some spirit materials and herbs. The power of the stars in Nie Tian's body was still too little, and it could only help him merge different types of spirit liquids. But this was enough for Nie Tian to complete the refinement of the spirit assimilation array. Nie Tian released the origin energy in his body, condensing thunder and flames to build the structure of the array, and then refined the spirit materials to support the array. Next, the 12 spirit array masters continued to refine the spirit materials, and Nye Tian merged the refined spirit liquids together and injected them into the spirit array. The spirit liquids merged into the spirit array, and the rune power of the array became more and more stable. The majestic power of the array circulated in the sky, spreading out for thousands of meters. In the blink of an eye, half a month passed. The moon shone in the sky, and the stars shone brightly. The spirit assimilation array had been refined for half a month, and hundreds of spirit materials had been refined. At this moment, the crowd looked nervously at the figure in the sky, holding their breaths, and their eyes trembled, not daring to make a sound. The scale of the spirit assimilation array was complete. The surging power of the array spread out to a distance of 10,000 meters. The entire array looked like a mountain formed from flames. Not only did the power of lightning surge within it, but there was also starlight flowing within it. Nye Tian had integrated the power of lightning and the power of stars into the spiritual absorption array, making the entire array more stable. In the void, Nye Tian's figure stood in the middle of the formation, the runic power of the formation circulating around his body. Next, it was the most crucial time to activate the array. The spiritual array had been completed, and whether or not it could be used depended on whether or not it could be successfully activated. Nye Tian closed his eyes and sensed the aura of the spiritual array, carefully and slowly. 2 balls of scarlet liquid floated above his hands, releasing a dense and violent energy. This was the spiritual liquid needed to activate the spirit assimilation array. It was refined from the 1,000-year-old Fusang wood and contained a strong wood attribute energy, which could trigger the first operation of the spirit assimilation array. The spirit assimilation array was very important to Nye Tian. As long as the array could be successfully activated, it could absorb the heaven and earth spiritual energy contained in the Yuan Qi earth vein. At that time, the heaven and earth spiritual energy within the array would be at least 1,000 times richer than the outside world. Cultivating in the array for a day was equivalent to cultivating in the outside world for a year or even several years. Everyone around him, including Mo Rushi, Qiu Shan, Zhang Yifeng, and the others, could all enter the spirit assimilation array. As long as the spirit assimilation array could be maintained for a month or even half a month, Mo Rushi and the others could easily advance to the peak of the divine wheel realm. Cultivating in the spirit assimilation array for a month was equivalent to dozens of years of hard work for ordinary warriors. A moment later, Nye Tian sensed an exquisite connection point of the spirit assimilation array. His eyes suddenly opened and he raised his hands slightly. 2 balls of scarlet spiritual liquid began to circulate in the air. Rays of dazzling light surged, making people feel as if they were in a dream. Slowly, under the watchful eyes of countless people, the scarlet spiritual liquid dissipated in the air and turned into a dazzling light that flowed into the spirit assimilation array. Boom! In the next moment, the spirit assimilation array suddenly shook, and the light it emitted was so bright that it even overshadowed the moonlight. The entire spirit assimilation array reacted and began to operate. Endless array aura gushed out, and the power of the array immediately filled the air. In the invisible space, the light from the spirit assimilation array slowly extended into the sky, like a giant tree full of vitality, growing towards the sky. How terrifying! The crowd stared at the strange scene in the sky, their eyes trembling, and their hearts filled with worship. Nye Tian must have some kind of heaven-defying and earth-shattering means to activate such a huge spiritual formation in a split second. At this time, Nye Tian was inside the spirit assimilation array, and his forehead was covered in beads of sweat. When the spirit assimilation array began to operate, he didn't relax at all. Instead, he became even more nervous. In the next moment, Nye Tian's aura skyrocketed, and the 9 heavens flame technique in his body operated crazily. Pure flames were released, and they instantly turned into a scarlet light that surged into the spirit assimilation array. After a while, the spirit assimilation array was completely stabilized, and the light released by the spirit assimilation array skyrocketed into the endless night sky. "This is amazing!" The crowd was shocked. They had never seen such a scene in their lives. Ji Wuxiu and the other spirit assimilation array masters were intoxicated, and the shock in their hearts could no longer be described with words. They suddenly felt that in front of Nie Tian, their little attainments in spirit assimilation array masters were completely insignificant. "It's done." Nie Tian suddenly raised his head and felt the power of the spirit assimilation array around him. The corner of his mouth curled into a smile, and he said faintly, "Spirit assimilation array, start operating." Roar! Roar! As soon as Nie Tian finished speaking, two intense dragon roars resounded through the heavens and the earth. Boom! Boom! In the next moment, two enormous figures shot out from the spirit assimilation array into the sky with a terrifying aura. The spirit assimilation array was activated, and two dragons shocked the sky. The two dragons were completely formed by flames, and their bodies were enormous, stretching for tens of thousands of meters. The power of thunder and stars flowed on the dragons, which was shocking to the world. The crowd on the ground was completely stunned. Their hearts trembled violently, and their eyes became blurred. The scene of two dragons shocking the sky was too shocking. Looking at the two dragons soaring into the sky, Nie Tian let out a long sigh of relief. He reached out his hand and touched his forehead, which was covered with sweat. The spirit assimilation array was finally activated, and it began to operate. The two fire dragons circled around the spirit assimilation array, protecting it. Nie Tian moved and landed on the ground with the dragon pattern elixir cauldron. For the past half a month, he had maintained a high level of mental tension. Now that he suddenly relaxed, he was about to collapse. "Master!" Zhang Yifeng walked over, looking excited. Nie Tian smiled faintly and returned the dragon pattern elixir cauldron to Zhang Yifeng, and said, "Yifeng, I've left the spirit assimilation array in the cauldron. Concentrate on comprehending it." "Yes. I won't let you down." Zhang Yifeng took the cauldron and felt the aura of the spirit assimilation array in it. He was very excited. Chapter 733. The spirit-absorbing formation was officially activated. The spiritual power of heaven and earth in the chi of the earth rose from the ground and poured into the formation. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. Mo Rushi, Qiu Shan, and the others walked out of the spirit-absorbing formation one after another. In just half a month, their strength had reached the 9th tier of the divine wheel. There was not much point in staying in the formation any longer. Nie Tian did not enter the formation. His strength was already at the heavenly evolution realm. No matter how much spiritual power he absorbed, he could not break through. He could only ascend to a higher level. Ruoyu, Zhen Su, Tawny, Rui Qianyu, and the others all increased their strength to the 9th tier of the divine wheel in the spirit-absorbing formation. Duanmulu, Gu Wuyo, and the others had also increased their strength to the 7th tier of the divine wheel. Even Jean de Bao had reached the 1st tier of the divine wheel. Right now, Jean de Bao could use his own strength to suppress the 3,000 seals of demons and gods. Nie Tian no longer had to worry about him. In the following time, everyone needed to cultivate in seclusion, stabilize their strength, and comprehend their realm. Their strength had increased too quickly. They needed to cultivate in seclusion for at least half a year to completely stabilize their realm. Nie Tian could not wait for half a year. He had already decided to go to the spatial world with Sun Hai first. It would not be too late to go to the spatial world after Mo Rushi and the others finished their seclusion. Nie Tian sent Mo Rushi and the others back to Tianluo City. Then, he returned to the sky crossing mountain range with Jean de Bao. Sun Hai was already waiting for them at the space-time boundary. After Sun Hai's modification, the space-time boundary had become a one-way passage from the 3,000 small worlds to the spatial world. "Mr. Sun, let's go." Nie Tian nodded at Sun Hai and smiled faintly. He had promised Sun Hai that after dealing with the 3,000 small worlds, he would go to the Sky Sword Pavilion with the latter. Yes. Sun Hai nodded. There was some hesitation in his eyes. He was not sure if bringing Nie Tian back to the Sky Sword Pavilion was the right thing to do. Nie Tian was very talented. As long as he was given some time, he would definitely grow to unimaginable height. What happened in the land of bloody massacre was not Nie Tian's fault. Nie Tian had killed 2 Supremacy Shui-Tu. The Sky Sword Pavilion's Vice Pavilion Master would definitely not let him off. Furthermore, Nie Tian had also taken away the Sky Sword Pavilion's Nirvana Sacred Heart. The entire Sky Sword Pavilion was extremely hostile towards him. Therefore, if he brought Nie Tian back to the Sky Sword Pavilion now, even with the Dragon Ring, it would be very difficult for him to survive. However, at this moment, Nie Tian's face was calm. He wasn't nervous at all. In fact, he was even a little excited. "Teacher, let's go." Jean de Bao chuckled. He was already standing at the entrance of the space-time barrier. He was already Sun Hai's disciple, so he naturally had to follow Sun Hai back to Sky Sword Pavilion. Sun Hai nodded, and the 3 of them stepped into the space-time barrier. The moment he stepped into the barrier, Nie Tian suddenly felt the space around him change. A huge external force pressed down on him from all directions, making him almost unable to breathe. A dazzling white light flashed past, making it hard for people to open their eyes. He felt a force tearing his body apart, almost tearing his body apart. This feeling lasted for an unknown amount of time. When he opened his eyes again, the scene in front of him had completely changed. He was surrounded by towering trees, and in the distance was a chain of mountains. "We're already in the Shumi world." Nie Tian felt his head was heavy. He shook it with all his might and muttered to himself, "Master, we're in the Shumi world." The one who answered Nie Tian wasn't Sun Hai, nor was it Jean de Bao. It was Corpse Luo Demon Lord. Nie Tian frowned slightly. He turned around and looked around. He actually couldn't see Sun Hai and Jean de Bao. "Oh no!" Nie Tian's heart suddenly sank. He exclaimed, "It must be because the space-time barrier opened for the first time. The location of the Shumi world is uncertain. I got separated from them." This was the first time they entered the plane channel transformed from the space-time barrier. The space-time was unstable, so Nie Tian got separated from Sun Hai and Jean de Bao. "I hope de Bao is still with Sun Hai." Nie Tian muttered to himself. Jean de Bao's strength was only at the first tier of the divine wheel, and it was unstable. It would be very dangerous for him to travel alone in the Shumi world. However, it was useless for Nie Tian to be anxious now. The space-time barrier corresponded to 2 planes. The slightest error could lead to a great distance. Nie Tian didn't even know where he was now. It was even more impossible for him to know where Jean de Bao was. He could only pray that Jean de Bao was still with Sun Hai. Nie Tian observed the surrounding environment. He was currently in a forest. The biggest difference between the forests of the Shumi world and the 3,000 small worlds was the vastness. The spiritual power of heaven and earth in the middle world was dozens of times denser than in the lower world. The trees and spirit beasts here were far stronger than in the lower world. Nie Tian thought for a while. He planned to leave the forest first and then ask about the location of Heaven's Sword Pavilion. Although he was separated from Sun Hai, he still had to go to Heaven's Sword Pavilion. Just as Nie Tian was about to turn around and leave, he suddenly felt a strong wind behind him, causing him to frown. Whoosh! The next moment, a sharp arrow pierced through the air and made an ear-piercing sound. Nie Tian reacted very quickly. He tilted his body slightly and dodged the sharp arrow. Bang! 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 Boom! The arrow was extremely powerful. It pierced through 3 giant trees in a row and finally hit a giant rock. The rock was actually blasted into pieces. What a sharp arrow! Nie Tian's eyes focused, and a glint shot out from his eyes. This arrow was extremely powerful. If he hadn't reacted fast enough, it was very likely that he would have been pierced through by the arrow. I dodged it. The next moment, a surprised voice sounded. Immediately, a young figure appeared and looked at Nie Tian with a strange expression. This figure looked to be only 15 or 16 years old. He was handsome and unruly. He held a black heavy bow in his hand, and the bowstring was still trembling. It was obvious that the fatal arrow just now was shot by this youth. Nie Tian looked at the archer youth with a gloomy expression. If he hadn't been strong enough just now, he would have been a corpse. This youth was young, but he was vicious enough to regard human life as worthless. Don't be rude. At this time, before Nie Tian could say anything, another figure suddenly landed on the ground. Immediately, a vast and mighty aura spread out. What a strong aura! Nie Tian looked at the middle-aged man who suddenly appeared. His expression tensed. The latter was actually a heavenly evolution realm warrior. This was just an ordinary forest, but a random person who came out was actually a heavenly evolution realm warrior. Warriors from the spatial world were indeed incomparable to those from the 3000 small world. Nie Tian then looked at the youth. He was actually also at the 5th tier of the divine wheel. To have such strength at the age of 15 or 16, he would definitely be a top genius in the 3000 small world. However, in the spatial world, he could barely be considered talented. The youth looked at the middle-aged man beside him and greeted respectfully, "Father." The corners of Nie Tian's mouth curled up slightly. This was a father and son pair. Chapter 734. Nie Tian had just arrived in the Xianmi world, yet he had suffered an inexplicable arrow. Of course, he was unhappy. However, Xian Songming's attitude of admitting his mistake was very good, so he did not take it to heart. "Father, I'm not fooling around. It's him who doesn't have eyes and insists on standing where the tip of my arrow is pointing." At this moment, Xian Yu's face was filled with dissatisfaction as he spoke with the corners of his mouth twitching. "Shut up," Xian Songming scolded, but his eyes were filled with love. Nie Tian could not help but frown slightly when he saw this. He glanced coldly at Xian Songming and said indifferently, "Your son is not a bad person, but he lacks discipline. If you blindly spoil him, you will only harm him." Nie Tian could see that Xian Songming was a dutiful person, but his son was not dutiful at all. Xian Yu was still young and was only fooling around. If he was not strictly disciplined in the future, he would definitely cause a great disaster. "Who do you think you are? What gives you the right to lecture me?" Xian Yu was furious when he heard Nie Tian's words. He drew his bow and shot an arrow without hesitation. Boom! The arrow was shot at such a close distance. A loud boom resounded in the air and a majestic force pressed down on Nie Tian. Xian Songming roared. He wanted to stop it, but it was too late. Nie Tian's eyes suddenly narrowed. He did not expect Xian Yu to be so hot-tempered and attack without a word. His body trembled slightly and a layer of golden halo lit up on his body. The halo flowed around his body and formed a golden shield. Bang! The powerful arrow bombarded Nie Tian's body. However, it was blocked by the golden shield and directly shattered. Nie Tian stood still and did not move an inch. Although Xian Yu's arrow was powerful, it was impossible for it to harm Nie Tian. "You're courting death." Nie Tian's eyes suddenly turned cold. He suddenly stretched out his hand and a huge force grabbed at Xian Yu from the void, directly snatching the black heavy bow from his hand. Crack! Nie Tian's hand grabbed at the air, and the black heavy bow shattered. "I'll give you a warning this time. If you dare to touch me again, it won't be the bow that will break, but you." Nie Tian's cold gaze swept across Xian Yu. After he finished speaking, he turned around and left. He did not want to get involved with such a person. If it was not for Xian Songming's good attitude, Xian Yu would have been crippled even if he did not die. You want to leave after breaking my brother's bow? However, right at this moment, a clear voice resounded, and then a murderous sword image appeared in the air, striking towards Nie Tian's back. Nie Tian was slightly taken aback. His aura skyrocketed, and a terrifying sword essence bloomed instantly. Boom! The two sword intents collided violently in the air, emitting a loud sound. Nie Tian turned around and saw a young girl about 17 or 18 years old. She had a sweet appearance and an exquisite figure. Her temperament was somewhat similar to Qiu Linger. First-level heavenly evolution strength. Nie Tian was slightly taken aback when he sensed the girl's strength. This girl was very young, but she was very powerful. Her aura was even more powerful than Xian Songming's. The Meru world was indeed full of crouching tigers and hidden dragons. The girl was shocked that Nie Tian had easily withstood her sword. She frowned slightly and stared at Nie Tian with a puzzled expression. Meow meow, stop! Xian Songming finally reacted. He hurriedly stepped forward and stood between Nie Tian and the girl. He cupped his fists at Nie Tian and said, "Little brother, I'm really sorry. It's all my fault for not teaching my son well. Please forgive me if I have offended you in any way." Xian Songming wiped the cold sweat off his forehead as he spoke. Although he had not exchanged blows with Nie Tian, he could tell that Nie Tian was very powerful and almost unfathomable. Xian Yu's black tortoise heavy bow was made of 1,000-year-old black tortoise wood, but it had been shattered by Nie Tian's palm strike. Such strength was really terrifying. Furthermore, Xian Miao Miao's sword strike was swift and fierce, but Nie Tian had withstood it effortlessly. It was even more extraordinary. "Father, what's going on?" Xian Miao Miao asked coldly, her pretty face a little ugly when she saw Xian Songming apologize. Xian Songming explained what had happened. In the end, he did not forget to say to Nie Tian, "Little brother, thank you for being lenient. I apologize on behalf of my son." Nie Tian shook his head slightly and did not say much. It was useless for Xian Songming to apologize. This time, Xian Yu had encountered Nie Tian. Next time, he might encounter Sikong Wuji. Nie Tian could not care less, but how could someone like Sikong Wuji tolerate Xian Yu? If Xian Yu was not disciplined properly, he would definitely cause a huge disaster in the future. After listening to Xian Songming's explanation, Xian Miao Miao looked slightly embarrassed. She wanted to apologize, but she could not say it. At this moment, several figures appeared. They were 4 young men in uniform, about 20 years old. "Junior sister Miao Miao, what happened?" One of the bewitching men walked over and sized up Nie Tian with a strange look in his eyes. "It's nothing." Xian Miao Miao answered and immediately said, "Senior brothers, let me introduce you. This is my father, and this is my younger brother." The few of them immediately greeted Xian Songming, looking very friendly. "Father, these are my senior brothers from Song Dragon Academy. The academy sent us to Song Dragon Mountain for training. I'm in the same group with 4 senior brothers," Xian Miao Miao said to Xian Songming with a smile. "So you are Miao Miao's senior brothers. Sorry for not recognizing you." Xian Songming was very excited and appeared very respectful. Xian Miao Miao was Xian Songming's genius daughter and the pride of the Xian family. She was an inner sect disciple of Song Dragon Academy, one of the 4 major martial arts academies of Xian Yu Empire. Since these 4 young men were Xian Miao Miao's senior brothers, they were definitely from Song Dragon Academy and were also inner sect disciples. Of course, they could not offend them. Song Dragon Academy, Song Dragon Mountain. Nie Tian listened at the side, but his eyes were fixed on the bewitching man, and the corners of his mouth could not help but twitch. This man had the strength of Heavenly Evolution Stage 2 and was quite talented. However, this was not the reason why Nie Tian was paying attention to him. Nie Tian could see that although this bewitching man was very polite to Xian Songming and the others, his eyes were filled with disdain. Furthermore, the way he looked at Xian Miao Miao was even more impure, revealing a strange expression from time to time. Junior sister Miao Miao, who is this? Suddenly, the bewitching man looked at Nie Tian with a disdainful and provocative gaze. Is he the person who fought with you just now? Do you want me to teach him a lesson in your place? Xian Miao Miao glanced at Nie Tian and smiled awkwardly. Senior brother Yunmu, what happened just now was a misunderstanding. There is no enmity between us. After Xian Miao Miao said that, she turned to Nie Tian and said, I'm sorry about what happened just now, I was reckless. You can leave now. Nie Tian smiled faintly and looked at the bewitching man Yunmu. Miss Miao Miao, I heard you say that you want to train in Tsang Dragon Mountain. Since I have nothing to do, can I come with you? I'm sorry, but this is a training mission of our Tsang Dragon Academy, so no one else is allowed to participate. You aren't a person of Tsang Dragon Academy, so you can't come with us. Xian Miao Miao pursed her lips and said apologetically. Chapter 735. Yunmu looked at Nie Tian with an arrogant and provocative gaze. Nie Tian's strength was at the first level of heavenly evolution, which was pretty good. But Yunmu was at the second level, and he was an inner disciple of Azure Dragon Academy, so he naturally wasn't afraid of Nie Tian. Moreover, he wanted to suppress Nie Tian to display his strength and make Xian Miao Miao look at him in a new light. Nie Tian's gaze narrowed slightly, and he glanced at Yunmu without concealing the disdain in his heart. Senior brother Yunmu, this young master is only at the first level of heavenly evolution, while you are at the second level. How could he receive your palm? You are making things difficult for him, Xian Miao Miao said with a frown without waiting for Nie Tian to reply. Although there was only a difference of one level between the first and second level of heavenly evolution, the heavenly evolution realm was already the later stage of the martial artist realm. The difference of one level was like the difference between heaven and earth. Humph. Yunmu sneered with a playful gaze. Since he doesn't have the strength, he doesn't have the qualifications to be with us. Let's go. After saying that, Yunmu turned around and no longer paid attention to Nie Tian. The three youths behind him laughed and didn't take Nie Tian seriously. Xian Songming looked at Nie Tian and shrugged helplessly. He believed that even if Nie Tian was very strong, he was still inferior to the inner disciples of Azure Dragon Academy. Wait! Just as Yunmu and the others turned around, Nie Tian's voice suddenly rang out. Yunmu's footsteps paused, and a hint of coldness flashed through his eyes. He turned around to look at Nie Tian, and the sneer on his face became even more pronounced. You want to receive my palm? I'm not interested in receiving your palm. The corners of Nie Tian's mouth twitched, and his gaze swept past Yunmu's body. But since you want to fight with me, I will accompany you to play, he said indifferently. But I want to change the way we play. Change the way we play? Brat, do you know who senior brother Yunmu is? Ranked 17th on the Azure Dragon Earth ranking. Fighting with senior brother Yunmu, you are courting death. Yeah. Senior brother Yunmu's Wind Thunder Palm is extremely domineering. Even a third-level heavenly evolution martial artist wouldn't dare to contend against it. This youngster only has the strength of a first-level heavenly evolution, but he wants to fight with senior brother Yunmu. He's really courting death. Just as Nie Tian finished speaking, the people behind Yunmu jumped out and clamored, praising Yunmu to the heavens. Xian Miao Miao was also startled, and her expression became somewhat awkward. Nie Tian shouldn't have attacked Yunmu just to vent his anger. Xian Miao Miao was very clear about what kind of person Yunmu was. He wouldn't hesitate to attack. It was very likely that Nie Tian would lose his life in a fit of pique. Humph. Yunmu was startled at first, but soon after, his expression became serious. A hint of killing intent flashed through his eyes, and he sneered. Youngster, how do you want to play? Since Nie Tian was courting death, why would Yunmu be polite? I want to make a bet with you. Nie Tian's expression was so calm that it caused people's hearts to palpitate. With an indifferent expression, he said, "One sword, I will only use one sword. After one sword, if you can still stand, then I lose. If you fall after one sword, then you lose. But if you lose, then don't bother Xian Miao Miao anymore. How about it?" Nie Tian's calm voice fell, but every word was like a sudden clap of thunder, bombarding everyone's hearts. His words were too arrogant. He didn't want to receive Yun Mu's palm, but to defeat him with one sword. Moreover, he wanted to beat him until he couldn't stand up. Was this possible? Impossible. Everyone present thought that it was impossible. Yun Mu was an inner disciple of Azure Dragon Academy, and he was ranked 17th on the Azure Dragon Earth ranking. Ordinary third-level Heavenly Evolution martial artists weren't his opponent, so how could Nie Tian, a first-level Heavenly Evolution martial artist, defeat him with one sword? The next instant, the people behind Yun Mu roared with laughter, looking at Nie Tian as if they were looking at an idiot. Nie Tian didn't pay any attention to other people's reactions. He only calmly waited for Yun Mu's reply. This face was given by Yun Mu himself. If Nie Tian didn't beat him up, he wouldn't be able to live with himself. He had absolute confidence that he could seriously injure or even kill Yun Mu with one sword. "Stinking brat, you asked for it." Yun Mu sensed the disdain in Nie Tian's eyes, and his entire body instantly erupted with rage. His voice became hoarse as he roared, "If you lose, then die." After saying the sinister word die, Yun Mu angrily turned around and attacked. Boom! In an instant, a violent wind and thunder energy rose from Yun Mu's body, and the surging power combined with the divine wheel space released a terrifying aura. Wind Thunder Palm. Senior brother Yun Mu is going to use his most terrifying Wind Thunder Palm. A youth cried out in fear, and his face turned deathly pale as he retreated. The others were also frightened, and they all retreated. "Senior brother Yun Mu, don't kill him!" Xian Miao Miao shrieked, and dense beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. However, it was already too late. "Brat, die!" Yun Mu bellowed, and his face became incomparably sinister. The wind and thunder energy around his body congealed on his palm, and a terrifying palm was brazenly thrown out. Instantly, wind and thunder surged, and the space trembled. The sound of wind and thunder actually resounded. An enormous shadow of a palm congealed from the power of wind and thunder appeared, and with great momentum, it pressed towards Nie Tian. "It's over." When Xian Miao Miao saw this scene, her heart sank, and her face became deathly pale. She was certain that Nie Tian was going to die. "You want to kill me?" Nie Tian's expression was calm. Facing Yun Mu's all-out attack, not only did he not show the slightest bit of fear, but the corners of his mouth rose, and a hint of coldness appeared on his face. Shortly after, boundless sword intent gushed out from his body, and a terrifying sword light blossomed in the sky. The divine wheel sword reappeared, and a terrifying sword energy soared into the sky. Nie Tian stood in the midst of the sword intent, and his figure was like a sharp sword. "Godly sword." Lightly muttering, he casually stabbed out with his sword. Boundless sword intent instantly congealed, and a majestic sword shadow appeared. An intense sword cry resounded through the air. Rumble! In an instant, the two attacks collided, and the void trembled. The two energies mutually destroyed each other. Ah! The next instant, a mournful scream resounded. Before anyone could see what had happened, Yun Mu's figure was sent flying, and a bloody arc appeared in the sky. Bang! Yun Mu fell to the ground, and a deep bloody mark was left on the ground. He struggled a few times, wanting to stand up, but his body was powerless, and he couldn't stand up. Nie Tian did what he said, and with one strike, Yun Mu couldn't even stand up. Xian Miao Miao and the other people of Tsang Long Academy looked at Yun Mu, who was still struggling on the ground, in a daze. They were completely petrified. The scene was deathly silent, and not the slightest sound could be heard. Who could have thought that one strike from Nie Tian would have such formidable power? It directly caused Yun Mu to be drenched in blood, and he couldn't even stand up. You've lost, get lost. Nie Tian retracted his heaven-severing sword and glanced at Yun Mu. He then said in a cold voice, "Remember my words, don't have any ideas about Xian Miao Miao in the future." After saying that, Nie Tian no longer had any interest in Yun Mu. What 17th place on the Azure Dragon Earth ranking of Tsang Long Academy? What a mess. Only at this time did the others react. "Senior brother Yunmu, are you alright?" Several people hurriedly ran over and supported Yunmu up. Chapter 736. Yunmu looked at Nie Tian with a vicious gaze, then suddenly looked at Xian Miao Miao and furiously roared, "Xian Miao Miao, it is your fortune that I can see you. If you are smart enough, then leave with me right now. Otherwise, I will definitely exterminate your Xian family." Yun Mu went crazy from anger and directly threatened Xian Miao Miao, which was completely different from his previous refined and courteous demeanor. "Yun Mu, you!" Xian Miao Miao frowned and her face turned slightly red. She was extremely angry, but she couldn't say anything. Nie Tian's gaze slightly narrowed, and soon after, his expression turned cold. A hint of ruthlessness appeared in his eyes, and his body slightly trembled. Two space-piercing sword intents whistled through the air. Whoosh! Whoosh! The sword intents pierced through the air with an ear-piercing whistle, sweeping up two rays of blood. My ears! The next instant, Yun Mu miserably howled like a pig being slaughtered. Nie Tian directly cut off both of his ears, and a cold, killing intent appeared on his face. He coldly said, "Since your ears can't understand my words, then keeping them is useless." Just now, Nie Tian had made a bet with Yun Mu, and since the latter had lost, he should have stopped bothering Xian Miao Miao. But who would have thought that he would become even more vicious? This was intolerable to Nie Tian. Everyone was startled once again, and their gazes trembled as they looked at Nie Tian as if they were looking at a monster. "Scoundrel!" Yun Mu covered his ears with both hands and furiously roared, "You dare to injure me! I am a member of the Yun family." "Yun family?" Nie Tianling coldly smiled, and his whole body surged with killing intent. He coldly said, "If you mention the word Yun again, I will take your life." The cold, killing intent filled the air, and Yun Mu's body inexplicably shuddered. He felt as if he had fallen into an icehouse. Nie Tian was too formidable, far surpassing his imagination. Senior brother Mu, let's go." The face of the person beside Yun Mu turned pale. He didn't dare to say the word Yun and only dared to call him Senior brother Mu. Yun Mu sensed the killing intent in Nie Tian's eyes and felt extremely wronged, but he didn't dare to open his mouth. After glancing at Nie Tian with extreme unwillingness, Yun Mu led the others away in a sorry state. Looking at their backs, Xian Miao Miao's delicate face was filled with worry. The Yun family was an enormous force that she could not afford to offend. "Are you from the Sky Sword Pavilion?" Xian Miao Miao suddenly looked at Nie Tian and asked with a frown. "Why do you ask?" Nie Tian asked with a faint smile. "Your sword intent is too strong." Xian Miao Miao's eyes sparkled as she said, "Only the Sky Sword Pavilion can nurture such a terrifying swordsman." "I'm not from the Sky Sword Pavilion." Nie Tian shook his head and smiled. He was speechless. It seemed that Heaven Sword Pavilion was indeed very powerful in the Sumeru world. Just because of his strong sword intent, Xian Miao Miao had determined that he was a member of Heaven Sword Pavilion. Xian Miao Miao frowned and couldn't conceal her astonishment. "You aren't from the Sky Sword Pavilion, so why did you injure Yunmu?" She was very baffled. Since Nie Tian wasn't from the Sky Sword Pavilion, why did he dare to provoke Yunmu? Could it be that he wasn't afraid of the Yun family's revenge? "Yunmu, he isn't a gentleman. The way he looked at you was wrong," Nie Tian replied indifferently. Xian Miao Miao slightly lowered her head and revealed a hint of bashfulness. Her heart was thumping wildly. Could it be that he injured Yunmu because of me? She wasn't an idiot and could naturally see that Yunmu was plotting against her. But the reason why he hadn't shown any disgust was because the Yun family was too powerful and was one of the 4 great families of the profound Moon Empire. The Xian family couldn't afford to offend the Yun family, so Xian Miao Miao didn't dare to show any disgust towards Yunmu. Now that Nie Tian had injured Yunmu, he had thoroughly infuriated the latter. In fact, it would bring disaster to Xian Miao Miao and the Xian family. Is the Yun family very powerful? Nie Tian saw Xian Miao Miao lowering her head in silence and knew that she was worried about Yunmu's revenge, so he asked. You don't know about the Yun family? Xian Miao Miao was startled. Nie Tian surprisingly hadn't even heard of the Yun family. I am a martial artist from the 3,000 small worlds of the lower planes. I have just stepped into the spatial world. Nie Tian didn't hide anything and answered honestly. You are someone from the lower planes. Xian Miao Miao, Xian Songming, and Xian Yu cried out in alarm at the same time. They looked at Nie Tian with incredulous expressions. A martial artist from the lower planes was surprisingly so terrifying. Nie Tian nodded indifferently with a calm expression. After staring at Nie Tian for more than 10 seconds, Xian Miao Miao forced herself to calm down and introduce the Yun family to Nie Tian. One of the 4 great families of the profound Moon Empire, no wonder Yunmu is so arrogant. Nie Tian calmly smiled and soon asked, what kind of power is the profound Moon Empire in the spatial world? How does it compare to the Heavenly Sword Pavilion? The profound Moon Empire is a first-rate empire in the spatial world, while the Heavenly Sword Pavilion is a first-rate sect. Their strength is about the same. This time, the one who replied to Nie Tian was Xian Songming. He had a better understanding of the distribution of powers in the spatial world. In that case, the Yun family, one of the 4 great families of the profound Moon Empire, is much weaker than the Heavenly Sword Pavilion, Nie Tian said with a faint smile. What kind of power is the Sacred Light Empire in the spatial world? The Sacred Light Empire. Xian Songming's gaze trembled, and he suspiciously looked at Nie Tian. I won't hide it from your distinguished self, but the Heavenly Sword Pavilion and the profound Moon Empire are both vassals of the Sacred Light Empire. The spatial world is divided into 3 regions. The Sacred Light region, the Divine Martial region, and the 10,000 Devils region. Seeing that Nie Tian was listening attentively, Xian Songming explained in detail. Among the 3 regions, the largest is the Sacred Light region, which occupies half of the spatial world and is ruled by the Sacred Light Empire. The second is the Divine Martial region, which is ruled by the Divine Martial Hall. The smallest is the 10,000 Devils region, which is ruled by the 10,000 Demons Dragon Abyss. The Sacred Light Empire, the Divine Martial Hall, and the 10,000 Demons Dragon Abyss are the top 3 forces in the spatial world, right? Nie Tian murmured, his eyes shining with sharpness. It turned out that the Sacred Light Empire was so powerful. No wonder Qian Longying was so arrogant. The 10,000 Demons Dragon Abyss was also very powerful, but it seemed to be a little weaker than the Sacred Light Empire. Before Nie Tian came to the spatial world, he had already crossed paths with the Sacred Light Empire and the 10,000 Demons Dragon Abyss. According to Sun Hai, his Spirit Dragon Ring should be from the 10,000 Demons Dragon Abyss. To unlock the secrets hidden in the Spirit Dragon Ring, he had to go to the 10,000 Demons Dragon Abyss. As for the Sacred Light Empire, Nie Tian would definitely go there within 3 years. He still had a battle appointment with the Sacred Light Patriarch. Yes. Xian Songming nodded and said, there are 4 top experts in the spatial world. They are the Sacred Light Patriarch of the Sacred Light Empire, the Hall Emperor of the Divine Martial Hall, the head of the 10,000 Demons Dragon Abyss, and Lord Distant Night. The 4 lords are known as the 4 peaks of the spatial world. Distant Night. Hearing the names of the 4 peaks of the spatial world, Nie Tian's attention was attracted by the last name. His body trembled slightly, and his eyes shone brightly. Distant Night was his 8th disciple. Previously, Nye Tian had learned about Distant Night from Li Yulai. Now that he heard the name again, his heart couldn't help but tremble inexplicably. At the same time, he felt a lot more relieved. Among Nye Tian's disciples, Distant Night was neither talented nor powerful, but he was the one that Nye Tian trusted the most. Distant Night was a rare general talent, and he was the right-hand man for Nye Tian to become the #1 war god in the heaven realm. Where is Distant Night now? After calming down, Nye Tian asked in a deep voice. Chapter 737. Hearing Xian Songming's words, Nye Tian's eyes suddenly trembled, and he could not help but exclaim, Li Yi and the Holy Light Ancestor are sworn brothers? Nye Tian and the Holy Light Great Ancestor had arranged a battle, but they never expected that the latter was actually Li Ye's sworn brother. Imagine if Li Yi was also present when Nye Tian and the Great Ancestor of Holy Light fought. It would be fun. Xian Songming looked at Nye Tian and smiled faintly. Since it was Nye Tian's first time in the Summer world, it was normal for him to have such a reaction since he did not know the relationship between Li Yi and the Sacred Light Ancestor. 2 of the 4 Sumeru peaks were sworn brothers. Such a matter was indeed very shocking. It's said that Holy Light Ancestor and Lord Li Yi have known each other for over 100 years. Additionally, half of the territory of the Holy Light Empire was conquered by Li Yi. In the Holy Light Empire, Lord Li Ye's status is comparable to that of the Holy Light Ancestor. Xian Songming nodded slightly as he explained patiently, a trace of fascination in his eyes. I see. Nye Tian smiled. He believed that more than half of the Holy Light Empire's territory was conquered by Li Yi. Since Li Yi was a peak expert of the Sumer world, his strength should be comparable to that of the Great Ancestor of Holy Light, so he should be a peak expert of the Celestial Being realm. Nye Tian was very satisfied with Li Ye's current situation. His former disciple had become a peak figure in the middle world after more than 100 years. Nye Tian was quite pleased. Xian Songming glanced at Nye Tian and suddenly said with a smile, Little brother, you seem to be very interested in Lord Dark Knight. Could it be that you know Lord Dark Knight? My name is Nye Tian. Nye Tian smiled faintly and said, I once fought with Li Yulai in the 3,000 Small Worlds. I'm only interested in the snake spirit body of the Li family. You fought with Lord Li Yulai? Xian Songming was taken aback and his expression froze. Li Yulai was the general of the Sacred Light Empire and the grandson of Lord Li Yi. Even in the Sumer world, he was a top expert. Nye Tian had fought against such a person before. Was it possible? If it was anyone else who said that, Xian Vastness would definitely think that that person was lying. However, Nye Tian was clearly not the kind of person who liked to brag. His words were very credible. Let's not talk about the past. Nye Tian casually waved his hand and walked over abruptly. Not only had he fought with Blazing Knight, but he had also nearly killed the crown prince of the Holy Light dynasty. If Vast Firmament knew about this, he would probably be scared out of his wits. After learning some important information, Nye Tian was in a good mood. He looked at Xian Miao Miao and said, Miss Miao Miao, don't you have a mission for the Zonglong Academy? Do you need me to come with you? Originally, Nye Tian wanted to go to the Sky Sword Pavilion. However, if he left now, Xian Songming and the others would be in danger. Hence, he decided to stay for a few days. Xian Miao Miao glanced at Nye Tian. She suddenly blushed and quickly lowered her head. Xian Songming was a shrewd man. He immediately noticed something and quickly said, Miao Miao, go with young Master Nye Tian. I will bring Xian Yu back to the Xian family fortress first. Father, you must be careful. Xian Miao Miao raised her head with a slightly worried expression. Xian Songming agreed and left with Xian Yu. After a while, only Nye Tian and Xian Miao Miao were left. Nye Tian glanced at her and knew that she seemed to have misunderstood something. However, it was not convenient for him to explain. He only said, Miss Meow Meow, let's go. Xian Meow Meow nodded and followed behind Nie Tian. After asking around, Nie Tian found out that the mission of the Long Academy was to hunt for 7th rank spirit beasts in the Long Mountain. Everyone had to hand over at least 3 7th rank spirit cores to the academy. 7th rank spirit beasts were very strong. They were equivalent to Heaven Evolution Realm martial artists. The Long Mountain was huge. However, 7th rank spirit beasts usually lived in the depths of the mountain range. Nie Tian planned to help Xian Miao Miao hunt 3 7th rank spirit beasts before returning to the Long Academy with her. He also wanted to see what the martial arts academy in the Shumi world was like. The two of them did not say a word along the way. Half a day later, the two of them arrived at the depths of the Long Mountain range. At that moment, 3 figures suddenly dashed out from afar at an extremely fast speed. Roar! The next moment, a furious roar was heard. It was like a clap of thunder that shook the void. What a powerful aura! Upon hearing the roar, Nie Tian's eyes focused and his expression changed slightly. He could feel a bloody and violent aura spreading toward him. It was unusually powerful. Oh no, it's the armored one-horned rhinoceros. Almost at the same time, Xian Miao Miao's pretty face suddenly changed, and she shouted a name. She could tell from the roar that it was the armored one-horned rhinoceros. The armored one-horned rhinoceros was a powerhouse among the 7th rank spirit beasts. Its beast strength was comparable to a 4th or even 5th rank Heaven Evolution Realm martial artist. It was very powerful. Help! At that moment, the 3 figures who were running saw Nie Tian and Xian Miao Miao and cried for help. Nie Tian took a closer look and saw that the 3 figures were actually women. They were all 17 or 18 years old, but they looked very disheveled and flustered. It's her, Huang Xianer. Xian Miao Miao also saw the faces of the 3 people clearly. She recognized one of them and shouted a name. Get out of the way! Nie Tian did not say much. He stomped his feet and his figure soared into the sky. A violent sword essence suddenly surged out. 8 Desolation Sword. In midair, he unsheathed his long sword and slashed out. The surging sword essence whistled down and pressed down like a stormy sea. The 3 figures dashed out quickly. The next moment, a huge black figure appeared. It was the armored one-horned rhinoceros. The armored one-horned rhinoceros was hundreds of meters long. Its body was black and covered with armor that was as hard as steel. It was full of power. From a distance, it looked like a moving mountain. Boom! Suddenly, the armored one-horned rhinoceros stomped its 4 hooves and its huge body directly flew up. Suddenly, a powerful and oppressive aura spread out and pressed down. Boom! At the same time, the surging sword essence in the sky pressed down like a mountain or an ocean. Moo! Under the violent pressure, the armored one-horned rhinoceros raised its head to the sky and let out a mournful howl. Its huge body was actually pressed down and fell heavily on the ground, raising dust several feet high. Boom! The ground shook violently. Rocks flew everywhere and dust filled the sky. A figure slowly descended from the sky. With a wave of the long sword in his hand, all the dust in the air fell down. The 3 figures were still in shock. They turned to look at Nie Tian, their eyes filled with disbelief. Who was this person? How could he be so powerful? Defeating the armored one-horned rhinoceros with one sword was too terrifying. Huang Xianer, why are you here? Xian Miao Miao looked at the battered people and said in a nervous voice with some concern. Xian Miao Miao. Only then did Huang Xianer see Xian Miao Miao. She was startled and immediately blurted out, It's you, Vixen. Huang Xianer and Xian Miao Miao knew each other, but their relationship wasn't good because of Yunmu. Previously, Yunmu had pursued Huang Xianer, but after Xian Miao Miao appeared, Yunmu gave up on Huang Xianer and pursued Xian Miao Miao instead. Because of this, Huang Xianer hated Xian Miao Miao to the point of gnashing her teeth. Chapter 738. the armored one-horned rhinoceros stood up again, and a violent aura surged around its body. The powerful aura released an oppressive force. Step back! Nye Tian looked at the giant beast in front of him. His body was like a sword, and a huge sword essence spread out for hundreds of meters. Huang Xian'er and Xian Miaomiao stopped quarreling and quickly stepped back. Huang Xian'er glanced at Nye Tian, and then looked at Xian Miaomiao. She muttered angrily, "Vixen?" Huang Xian'er couldn't understand. In terms of appearance, she was not inferior to Xian Miaomiao. Why were so many geniuses surrounding her? The armored one-horned rhinoceros body was like a mountain, and there was a terrible black brilliance flowing all over its body. Its bell-like eyes released a bloody and violent aura. It stared at Nye Tian and wanted to tear him into pieces. Nye Tian's eyes were as calm as water. He opened the sword of divine wheel, and a terrible sword essence flowed around his body. The armored one-horned rhinoceros seemed to smell danger. After a violent roar, it calmed down. The armored one-horned rhinoceros is afraid. Seeing this, Xian Miaomiao shouted in surprise. However, as soon as she finished speaking, the body of the armored one-horned rhinoceros moved. Its 4 hooves galloped and the earth trembled. It rushed toward Nye Tian. The sharp horn of the rhinoceros flashed with a black brilliance, and a terrible black halo was released. It was a very terrible pressure. "Good beast, you still know how to play tricks." Nye Tianling sneered and suddenly punched. A thunder dragon roared out and directly broke the pressure released by the horn of the rhinoceros. The momentum was broken, and the attack of the armored one-horned rhinoceros stopped for a moment. It was only a moment, but it was enough for Nye Tian. God-piercing sword. Nye Tian took another step and jumped high. The sword Absolute Heaven Slash was used again. It was one of the 3 advanced moves of the AO sword tactic. The perfect fusion of the 3 sword essences bloomed in the air, and a sharp sword shadow cut down from the sky. Swish! The huge sword fell, and in just a moment, the murderous sword shadow drew a bloody arc. The ground shook violently and a bloody crack appeared. It was dazzling. Under the sword, the armored one-horned rhinoceros was directly cut in 2, and a river of blood appeared on the ground. The amazing armored one-horned rhinoceros was killed by Nye Tian in an instant. Xian Miaomiao, Huang Xian'er, and the others were completely dumbfounded. Their mouths were wide open, but no sound came out. It was so shocking that it could not be. As Nye Tian landed on the ground, he raised his arm, and a black, head-sized spiritual core appeared in his palm. It was none other than the spiritual core of the armored one-horned rhino. "Miss Miaomiao." Nye Tian called out and threw the spiritual core to Xian Miaomiao. Xian Miaomiao was Miaomiao and said, "Miaomiao Divine Way and Star Miaomiao King." Rhino said Ping. And NA and put AA and the value of a rank 7 spirit core was very high, especially for an extremely powerful rank 7 spirit beast like the armored one-horned rhinoceros. Its value was even higher, and any auction house could sell it for a sky-high price. "Thank you, big brother Nye Tian." Xian Miaomiao's face was full of shyness. "Thank you, big brother Nye Tian." Xian Miaomiao blushed and put away the spirit core. "Xian Miaomiao." At this time, a sarcastic voice sounded. Huang Xian'er said with disdain, "This young master risked his life to get the 7th grade spirit core. What right do you have to take it? Shameless." "Huang Xian'er, who are you calling shameless?" Xian Miaomiao's face turned red, and she looked slightly embarrassed. "I'm talking about you." Huang Xian'er pointed at Xian Miaomiao's nose like a shrew and said, "First, you seduced senior brother Yimu. When you failed, you seduced this young master and made him risk his life to kill a spirit beast for you. If you are not shameless, then what are you?" "Huang Xian'er, you." Xian Miaomiao was shy and couldn't say anything after hearing Huang Xian'er's words. Nye Tian, who was watching from the side, frowned slightly. Huang Xian'er was really shameless. Just now, he had helped to save her, But this woman not only didn't say a word of thanks, but also insulted Xian Miao Miao. It was too much. You are called Huang Xianer? Nie Tian's face turned slightly cold. Yes. When Huang Xianer heard Nie Tian's words, she immediately tidied up her makeup, smiled sweetly, and said, "This little girl is Xianer. May I ask young master's name?" Huang Xianer's respectful words made Nie Tian feel a chill run down his spine. He frowned slightly and paused for a moment. The corners of his mouth twitched and he squeezed out a word from between his teeth. "Get lost." What? When Nie Tian said this, everyone was stunned. Even Xian Miao Miao looked at him in surprise. Wasn't it too much to tell a girl to get lost? "Young master, what did you say?" Huang Xianer seemed to suspect that she had heard wrong and couldn't help but ask. "I said, get lost." Nie Tian's voice was indifferent, and he said it word by word. Huang Xianer froze in place, her mouth opened wide, and she couldn't say a word for a long time. "Miao Miao, let's go." Nie Tian ignored her and turned to leave. Xian Miao Miao reacted and hurriedly followed. Huang Xianer froze in place for a long time before she reacted. Looking in the direction where Nie Tian and Xian Miao Miao left, her pretty face became hideous. "You bastard, I, Huang Xianer, am one of the 4 beauties of the inner court of Blue Dragon Academy. You actually told me to get lost." After a while, a sharp and harsh voice resounded, spreading thousands of meters away. And thousands of meters away, Nie Tian's figure hadn't gone far yet. When he heard the scream, he sneered contemptuously. A woman like Huang Xianer relied on her beauty and talent to raise her nose to the heavens. She wanted to please Nie Tian, but unfortunately, Nie Tian hated this kind of woman the most, so he naturally wouldn't be polite to her. "Brother Nie Tian, thank you for just now." Xian Miao Miao, who was following behind Nie Tian, couldn't help but smile when she heard the scream in the distance. "It's nothing." Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, "You were often bullied by Huang Xianer in Blue Dragon Academy. You must not be polite to this kind of person. The more you tolerate her, the more arrogant she becomes." Nie Tian could see from Xian Miao Miao's attitude towards Huang Xianer that she must have been bullied by Huang Xianer in Blue Dragon Academy. Xian Miao Miao lowered her head and didn't say anything, which was a tacit agreement. Huang Xianer was stronger than her, and her appearance wasn't inferior to her, but Yunmu gave up on Huang Xianer and pursued her. This was the reason why Huang Xianer often bullied her. At this time, Xian Miao Miao suddenly thought of something, and with a worried expression, she said, "Brother Nie Tian, Huang Xianer is one of the 4 beauties of the inner court. There are countless people pursuing her. If you offend her, she will definitely retaliate." Just now, Nie Tian's roar was very satisfying, but Huang Xianer wasn't a good person and would definitely look for an opportunity to retaliate. Nie Tian smiled and said, "I'm not even afraid of Yunmu, so why would I be afraid of Huang Xianer?" Xian Miao Miao was startled and helplessly pursed her lips. Nie Tian didn't seem to be afraid of anyone. Who exactly was he? Chapter 739. Nie Tian slowly turned around, his gaze slightly focused, and the corners of his mouth rose helplessly. In the distance, several figures were madly rushing over. Even though they were several hundred meters away, their towering anger had already filled the air, and their pressuring presence wasn't weak. "It's Yunmu." Xian Miao Miao suddenly turned around, and when she saw one of the figures, she cried out in alarm, and her small face suddenly changed. Yunmu had appeared again, and he was definitely here for revenge. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 figures descended. Their presence was formidable, and their killing intent was cold. All of them stared maliciously at Nie Tian. Nie Tian's gaze swept across the people in front of him, and finally fell on the earless Yunmu. The corners of his mouth curled up in disdain, and he sneered. "Yunmu, bringing back a group of shrimp soldiers and crab generals, are you tired of living?" Among the people in front of him, apart from the fatty who was at the 3rd level of heavenly evolution, there were 3 who were at the 2nd level, and the rest were at the 1st level of heavenly evolution. This kind of lineup was extremely terrifying, but it was a pity that they were too weak in front of Nie Tian. Nie Tian discovered that apart from Yunmu and the people in front of him, the other people's clothes were different from theirs. They clearly weren't people of Blue Dragon Academy. Big brother Nie Tian, they are people of Black Moon Academy. Xian Miao Miao transmitted her voice to Nie Tian, reminding him. Black Moon Academy? Nie Tian was slightly startled. Xian Miao Miao explained, Black Moon Academy is the same as Blue Dragon Academy, one of the 4 great academies of Black Moon Empire. However, Black Moon Academy only accepts members of the royal family, not commoners. I see. Nie Tian nodded slightly, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a faint smile. Yunmu, is this the youngster who injured you? The fatty in the lead asked coldly. His gaze sized up Nie Tian, and his eyes revealed undisguised contempt. Nie Tian's strength was only at the first level of heavenly evolution. Compared to him, who was at the 3rd level of heavenly evolution, he was far inferior. 17th Prince, this is the person who injured me. You have to take revenge for me. Yunmu looked at Nie Tian with a sinister gaze, a hint of craftiness in his eyes. Prince? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He really couldn't tell that this fatty was actually a prince. This fellow looked to be around 30 years old, and had the strength of a 3rd-level heavenly evolution. He was not considered trash in front of them. Prince! Xian Miao Miao cried out involuntarily when she heard the fatty's identity. How could she have expected that Yunmu would surprisingly invite a prince of Black Moon Empire? It was not that this fatty was very strong. Just his identity as the Black Moon Prince was very troublesome. Your Highness, my surname is Xian and I am a branch of the imperial family. The matter just now was a misunderstanding. Big brother Nie Tian didn't intentionally injure senior brother Yunmu. Xian Miao Miao's small face twisted into a ball as she took a step forward and said awkwardly. Actually, speaking of which, Xian Miao Miao was also a member of the royal family. Unfortunately, she was from a branch family and had long left the Xianwei royal family. Hence, the current Xian family castle was not even comparable to a normal noble family. It basically had nothing to do with the royal family. Your surname is Xian? 17th Prince Xian Qi looked at the young girl in front of him with a hint of passion in his eyes. Shortly after, he laughed mischievously and said, Yunmu, is this the woman you want to offer to this prince? Yunmu nodded with a smile and said, 17th Prince, her name is Xian Miao Miao. She was originally my woman, but unfortunately, she was too fickle and took a fancy to the youngster by her side. She even allowed this youngster to injure me. As long as 17th Prince helps me kill this youngster, Xian Miao Miao will belong to your highness. Once Yunmu's words fell, the people in the surroundings burst into laughter. Everyone looked at Xian Miao Miao with a strange expression. Their gazes were filled with lust, as if the girl in their eyes was a slut who could be married to anyone. Yunmu, what nonsense are you spouting? Xian Miao Miao's charming face turned red, and her chest violently heaved up and down. Clearly, she was extremely furious. Yunmu was too shameless. He was completely spouting nonsense. Xian Miao Miao was still a little girl. If these words were spread out, how would she be able to maintain her dignity? Miao Miao, good name. Xian Qi laughed mischievously. His gaze was filled with lust, and his saliva almost flowed out. Miss Miao Miao, your temperament is quite fiery. This prince likes to ride a fiery horse. Ha ha! While speaking, Xian Qi burst into laughter, and his eyes flickered with lust. This guy was even more of a scum. He surprisingly didn't even let off a member of his own race. Xian Miao Miao's face turned red, and her body trembled. Tears of grievance flowed down her face. Scoundrel! Nie Tian suddenly took a step forward, and his anger erupted from his body. A vast sword intent spread out and enveloped everyone. Nie Tian's gaze was like fire, emitting a cold, killing intent. The corners of his mouth trembled, and he said one word at a time, all of you must die. Today's matter, if the words Yunmu had said spread out, regardless of whether they were true or false, everyone would treat them as the truth. This would thoroughly destroy Xian Miao Miao's reputation. Nie Tian wouldn't allow such a thing to happen. Therefore, all the people in front of him had to die. 17th Prince, this youngster wants to kill people. Yunmu was aware of Nie Tian's methods. When he sensed the fury in the latter's eyes, he was so frightened that he retreated and almost fell. All must die. Xian Qi's gaze turned cold, and his expression became arrogant. He laughed coldly and said, "Stinking brat, you're just a piece of trash at the first level of heavenly evolution, yet you dare to be impudent in front of this prince. You really don't know the difference between life and death." After saying that, Xian Qi waved his hands, and the martial artists behind him immediately took a step forward. Their auras surged, and their cold gazes locked onto Nie Tian. Die! Nie Tian didn't even look at these people. His body trembled, and numerous sword intents gushed out. A terrifying sword aura blossomed, and a deadly sword light was released in the air. Whoosh! Whoosh! 3 sword lights flew out at the same time, accompanied by 3 dazzling rays of blood. 3 first-level heavenly evolution martial artists were sent flying. They didn't even have time to scream. After they landed on the ground, they immediately stopped breathing. Nie Tian had activated Sword of Warp, and his sword intent was greatly enhanced. It wasn't something these people could resist. Seeing that Nie Tian had killed 3 people without even moving, Xian Qi's gaze suddenly tightened, and he said in astonishment, "What a powerful sword intent! You're from Sky Sword Pavilion? You can ask in hell." Nie Tian didn't give Xian Qi a chance to catch his breath. The absolute heaven slash suddenly appeared in his hand, and he directly stabbed with it. Boom! His battle intent was wild, and the unrestrained sword intent wreaked havoc in the air. A terrifying sword aura suddenly blossomed, and a dazzling sword shadow shot out, heading straight for Xian Qi. Bang! There was a muffled sound, and Xian Qi was directly sent flying. When he landed, he kicked up a dozen feet of dust. But the next moment, he stood up again, completely unharmed. "Stinking brat, with your strength, you want to hurt this prince? Impossible!" Xian Qi's body shook, and the dust around him scattered. A pair of cold eyes locked onto Nie Tian, and his face became distorted. He didn't expect that Nie Tian would actually dare to directly attack. Did the latter not know that he was a prince? Chapter 740. Nie Tian's attack just now was not weaker than the one that killed the armored one-horned rhinoceros, but it did not injure Xian Qi. Xian Qi's defense definitely could not compare to the armored one-horned rhinoceros, so he must be wearing a 7th-level armor. A 7th-level armor was enough to block an attack from a high-stage Heaven Evolution martial artist. Nie Tian did not think that Xian Qi would have such a good item on him. However, most people would not wear these defensive totems. This was because while armor gave a martial artist a strong defense, it also restricted a martial artist's martial body, severely hindering the improvement of a martial body. Xian Qi wearing a 7th-level armor could only mean that he was a person who was very afraid of death. Xian Qi was slightly surprised. He did not think that Nie Tian would see through him. He immediately laughed and said, "Even if this prince is wearing a 7th-level armor, with your strength, even if this prince doesn't move, you won't be able to harm a hair on me. Is that so?" The corner of Nie Tian's mouth curved into a cold smile, his eyes filled with extreme contempt. Xian Qi's strength was not strong. The reason he was so arrogant was because of his status as a prince of the Black Moon Empire. Unfortunately, in Nie Tian's eyes, this status was not even worth a fart. Nie Tian dared to kill the crown prince of the Holy Light Sky Empire in the 3,000 Lesser Worlds. Now that he was in the Shumi world, how could he be afraid of a useless prince of the Black Moon Empire? At this time, several gazes looked suspiciously at Xian Qi. Originally, they thought that Xian Qi was very strong, able to receive Nietion's attack without a scratch. They did not think that he was wearing a 7th level armor. "What are you looking at? Kill him for this, prince!" Xianqi roared, the fat on his face trembling. Nietion's words had torn off his mask, causing him to lose face, so he must die without a doubt. Yes. Several people responded at the same time and turned around. Their murderous gazes locked onto Nietion, but they were very afraid. No one dared to be the first to attack. Just now, Nietion's strength had already been revealed. It was extremely strange. At this moment, how would these people dare to stand out? So polite? Nietion laughed mockingly. "Since you are not going to make a move, I will." As Nietion's voice faded, he raised the sword in his hand. A terrifying sword will rippled out, emitting an intense sword cry. "Let's attack together and kill him." Just at this moment, someone reacted. If they allowed Nietion to make the first move, they would have no chance at all. With an anxious shriek, they struck out with their palms. Almost at the same time, the others also reacted and made their move. Boom! Suddenly, there was an explosion in the air. Billowing waves of qi rolled out, and origin energy raged, pressing towards Nietion. "Humph!" Nietionling laughed. His figure moved and turned into a stream of light. The surging sword will burst out with a brilliant brilliance, surging and blooming in the air, bursting with a terrifying aura. Bang! 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 Several muffled sounds rang out, and several figures were sent flying. They coughed out blood in the air, and when they landed on the ground, they died on the spot. Nietion's strength was too formidable. In front of him, the same level practitioners were like clay chickens and pottery dogs, unable to withstand a single blow. His sword path had already reached the peak of sword energy, and he could step into the sword spirit realm at any time. At that time, his strength would definitely increase by leaps and bounds. In the blink of an eye, only 5 of the dozen practitioners remained, including Mysterious Fantasy. Mysterious Fantasy's subordinates were all dead, and his face was extremely gloomy. He furiously roared at Yunmu. "Yunmu, what are you waiting for? Why aren't you attacking?" Yunmu's face was waxy yellow, and he stood there like a statue. He hadn't expected that Nietion's strength would be so tyrannical. It was completely beyond his imagination. "You guys attack together and kill him." Yunmu suddenly turned around and furiously roared at the 3 people behind him. The 3 of them were scared silly, but they were woken up by Yunmu's loud roar. The next instant, a brilliant light flashed through their eyes, and they simultaneously retreated several steps, preparing to escape. "You still want to escape now? It's too late." Nietionling coldly smiled, and his figure flashed like a ghost. 3 sword lights flashed in the air, and the 3 people stood in the same place. Their pupils abruptly widened, and then they strangely fell to the ground. Bang! 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 3 explosions rang out, and the 3 people who fell to the ground exploded. Sword energy shot out in all directions, and blood splattered everywhere. When Mysterious Fantasy saw this scene, he was completely stupefied. The fat on his face squeezed together, and he couldn't say a single word for a long time. Nietion's entire body was filled with killing intent. He took a step forward, and his gaze locked onto Mysterious Fantasy. Cold smile appeared on his face, and he said, "17th Prince, your subordinates are all dead, it's your turn now." Mysterious Fantasy felt the killing intent assaulting him, and he gulped down a mouthful of saliva. Both of his legs began to tremble. He wasn't an idiot. Of course he could tell that he was no match for Nietion. Just the speed and power of Nietion's attack, as well as the way he killed, were far from what he could do. Mysterious Fantasy took 2 steps forward, and a smile appeared on his fat face, and he said, "Sir, what happened just now was a misunderstanding. This prince will pretend that nothing happened, and we will stop here. How about it?" "Stop here?" The corner of Nietion's mouth twitched, and he playfully smiled and said, It was originally a misunderstanding, but since you want to kill me, it's not a misunderstanding anymore. Big brother Nye Tian, let's just forget about it. At this time, Xian Miao Miao came to Nye Tian's side, and said in a small voice, no matter what, Mysterious Fantasy was still a prince of the Black Moon Empire, and couldn't be killed so easily. Moreover, Mysterious Fantasy had already admitted defeat, and even offered to stop. It couldn't be better for this matter to end here. Nye Tian looked back at Xian Miao Miao, shook his head, and said, Miss Miao Miao, you're too naive. Do you think that if I let the 17th prince go, we'll be safe? I'm afraid that the moment I let him go, the 16th prince and the 15th prince will immediately come to take revenge for him. Since the 17th prince has already joined in, this matter can't end here. We, the Yun family and the Black Moon Imperial family, are like fire and water. If we don't die, the Yun family and the Black Moon Imperial family won't stop. After saying this, Nye Tian's gaze turned to Yunmu and Xianqi, and he playfully said, Am I right, you two? There were some matters that Xian Miao Miao couldn't see through, but Nye Tian could see through them with a single glance. In fact, from the moment Yunmu had entangled himself with Xian Miao Miao, the latter was destined to be unable to live a peaceful life. There were only two paths in front of her: submit to Yunmu and become a plaything, or resist to the end and become a sacrifice. Given Xian Miao Miao's personality, the former path was more likely. After all, she would always consider the interests of the Xian family. But now that Nye Tian had appeared, everything was different. Xian Miao Miao could only resist to the end, but she definitely wouldn't become a sacrifice. Yunmu and Xianqi's pupils shrank at the same time, and their bodies couldn't help but shudder. Not only did Nye Tian possess heaven-defying strength, even his insight into matters was extremely sinister. Chapter 741. Both of you must die. His cold voice was like a clap of thunder, bombarding Yunmu and Xianqi's hearts. Nye Tian took a step forward. His figure was like a mountain, bringing with it a heavy pressure. Xianqi was startled at first, but soon his face became sinister and he roared, Stinking brat, do you really think this prince is afraid of you? As soon as he finished speaking, Xianqi struck out with his palm. A powerful palm energy burst forth and pressed down on Nye Tian. Humph! Nye Tian smiled disdainfully and thrust his sword forward. A terrifying sword intent pierced through the palm energy wave and bombarded Xianqi's body, sending him flying. Nye Tian's sword intent was too terrifying. It could practically tear apart anything. The next instant, Nye Tian's figure suddenly moved. His figure flickered in the air and directly approached Xianqi. His palm grabbed at the air, and a powerful force clamped down on Xianqi's neck, causing him to hover in the air. Although Xianqi was a third-layer heaven evolution stage martial artist, whether it was in terms of spirit energy, martial body, or physical strength, he was far inferior to Nye Tian. Brat, I am the Prince of Black Moon Empire. If you dare to kill me, you're dead. Xianqi's face turned red as he squeezed out a few words while trembling. Your threats are too cliché. There's nothing new about them. Nye Tian's lips curled into a cold smile. Shortly after, he exerted more force in his hand. Your status is nothing to me. Crack. As soon as the last word was said, a crisp sound rang out. Xianqi's head tilted to the side and he died on the spot. A dignified prince of Black Moon Empire had been killed on the spot. Moreover, his neck had been directly broken. How vexing! After killing Xianqi, Nye Tian raised his arm and tore off the 7th-grade battle armor, storing it in his spatial ring. Next, Nye Tian's gaze turned and locked onto Yunmu. A sinister smile appeared on his face, like a wolf that had seen a lamb. Gulp. Yunmu's entire body was shrouded in killing intent. His throat trembled and his eyes trembled. His forehead and back were covered in sweat. He opened his mouth, but he couldn't say a single word. Nye Tian even dared to kill a prince of Black Moon Empire, so why would he be afraid of a small Yun family? What else do you have to say? Nye Tian slightly raised his eyebrows, his eyes filled with mockery. At some point, Yunmu suddenly looked at Xian Miao Miao, and his knees went soft. He knelt down on the ground and begged, Junior Sister Miao Miao, I beg you to plead for leniency for me. We are both students of Blue Dragon Academy, we are fellow apprentice brothers and sister. Xian Miao Miao frowned, her eyes filled with hesitation. Miao Miao. At this, Xian Miao Miao of Xian Tian, Yun of Tian Yun, Yun of Qi of the. When you colluded with the people of Black Moon Academy, did you ever think that you and Xian Miao Miao were brother and sister? Nye Tian swept a glance at Yun Mu and coldly said, What's the use of keeping a bastard like you? Nye Tian was vicious and merciless. How could he be swayed by a few words of praise from Yun Mu? After killing all of them, Nye Tian looted their spatial rings and made a small fortune. What made Nye Tian even happier was that Xian Qi had more than 10 7th-grade spirit cores. Thus, Xian Miao Miao's mission was completed. Xian Miao Miao looked at Xian Qi lying on the ground and said, The people of Black Moon Academy are definitely carrying out a mission in Azure Dragon Mountain Range. If the 17th prince is discovered by the people of Black Moon Academy, it will be terrible. Nye Tian faintly smiled and said, Don't worry, no one will be able to discover them. As he said this, the corners of Nye Tian's mouth slightly rose. A ball of flame gushed out from between his 5 fingers and transformed into a fire snake. In an instant, the corpse on the ground was completely incinerated, not even leaving a single trace of blood. Big brother Nye Tian, you are an alchemist? Xian Miao Miao was startled and cried out in surprise. Nye Tian's spirit energy clearly didn't belong to the fire attribute, but he could create flames out of thin air. This was something only an alchemist could do. Nye Tian faintly nodded his head and faintly smiled. He swept his gaze around and said, Let's go. Since they already had a 7th-grade spirit core, there was no point in staying any longer. The depths of Azure Dragon Mountain Range was extremely dangerous. If they encountered a 7th-grade spirit beast, Nye Tian wouldn't be able to guarantee Xian Miao Miao's safety. Big brother Nye Tian, Azure Dragon Academy is currently recruiting new students. Do you want to enter the academy? On the way, Xian Miao Miao suddenly asked. Nye Tian faintly shook his head and said, I don't have any interest. I only want to take a look at Azure Dragon Academy. Miao Miao, have you heard of the name Fire Armor? After a while, Nye Tian suddenly asked. He saw this name on the 7th-grade battle armor just now. Obviously, it was the person who forged the 7th-grade battle armor. A person who could forge a 7th-grade battle armor was at least a 7th-grade blacksmith. Nye Tian had just taken a look at the 7th-grade battle armor. The refining method and the fusion of materials were all superior and very good. He wanted to meet the fire armor and ask it to help him upgrade the Heaven-Severing Sword. The current Heaven-Severing Sword was a 5th-grade spirit weapon. Its grade was not low, but compared to Nye Tian's strength, it was a little weak. Nye Tian originally wanted to refine the Devil Flow Sword to upgrade the Heaven-Severing Sword. Unfortunately, with his refining method, he was actually unable to refine the Devil Flow Sword. Fire Armor Master. Hearing Nye Tian mention this name, Xian Miao Miao was stunned and her eyes revealed a look of reverence. Oh, it seems that this person is very famous. Seeing Xian Miao Miao's reaction, Nye Tian smiled faintly and said, Where is he now? Xian Miao Miao smiled sweetly and said seriously, Fire Armor Master is the #1 blacksmith in Xian Yu Empire. I heard that he was a 7th-grade blacksmith decades ago. Now, he is probably a 8th-grade blacksmith. Big brother Nye Tian, are you looking for him to ask him to help you refine a spirit weapon? Yes. Nye Tian smiled faintly and did not hide anything. He said, I want him to help me upgrade the grade of a spirit weapon. Since the Fire Armor Master was an 8th-grade blacksmith, Nie Tian could rest assured to hand over the heaven-severing sword to him. I see. Xian Miao Miao pouted and said worriedly, "It is very difficult to meet the fire armor master. I heard that it is difficult even for the royal family to meet the fire armor master, let alone ask him to refine a spirit weapon." "It's okay." Nie Tian smiled faintly and the corner of his mouth raised confidently. He said, "As long as you bring me to the residence of the fire armor master, I naturally have a way to ask him to refine a spirit weapon for me." The profession of blacksmith was rarer than the alchemist. Its status was extraordinary and was far from being comparable to ordinary martial artists. Especially some blacksmith masters, they thought highly of themselves and often had some quirks, which made them very difficult to deal with. However, Nie Tian was confident that he could definitely move this fire armor master. Xian Miao Miao lowered her head and said. She seemed to be a little depressed. Nie Tian was too outstanding, which made her feel a sense of inferiority. Chapter 742. The mystic moon imperial city in front of them was tall and imposing. It looked even more magnificent than the 3,000 small worlds Su Mi Ling, as expected of the Su Mi world. Even the imperial city of a small empire is so majestic. Nie Tian looked at the mystic moon imperial city from afar and exclaimed, "Brother Nie Tian, the mystic moon imperial city is huge. The 4 major academies are in the imperial city. There is also the Alchemist Guild, the Craftsman Guild, the Array Master Guild and many other clans. This is your first time in the Su Mi world. I will bring you around." When Xian Miao Miao heard Nie Tian's exclamation, she suddenly remembered that he was from the 3,000 small worlds. She couldn't help but reveal a joyful expression on her face. "Okay." Nie Tian nodded and smiled. He then walked towards the imperial city. After a while, the 2 figures appeared in the imperial city. When Nie Tian entered the imperial city, the first thing he felt was that the hierarchy was strict. Upon entering the imperial city, there were 2 roads. One of them was narrower, but it was still 10 meters wide. The other was extremely wide, about 50 to 60 meters wide. Nie Tian didn't understand. He wanted to take the wider road but was stopped by Xian Miao Miao. She said, "Brother Nie Tian, this road is for the nobles. We can't take it." Nie Tian frowned slightly. His face was a little gloomy. He said in a low voice, "There is such a thing in this world? Ridiculous." At that moment, many people stopped in their tracks and looked Nie Tian up and down with strange looks in their eyes. "Brother Nie Tian, let's go this way." Xian Miao Miao's little face was a little nervous. She gently pulled on Nie Tian's sleeve. Nie Tian thought for a while and chose the narrow road. He didn't want to put Xian Miao Miao in a difficult position. If he was alone, even if it was the throne room, he would still barge in. Xian Miao Miao carefully left with Nie Tian. After a while, they came to a bustling area. "Big brother Nie Tian, this is the market square. There are all kinds of things: spirit pills, spirit artifacts, spirit diagrams, martial arts, martial skill scrolls, and all kinds of spirit pet." Xian Miao Miao was a little excited. Like a happy bird, she happily introduced to Nie Tian. "Yes." Nie Tian smiled and nodded. This Xian Miao Miao looked strong on the surface, but in fact, she had a typical young girl's heart. At this time, she was no longer wary of Nie Tian, and her natural state was revealed, just like a lively girl. Markets were usually frequented by ordinary people. The rich nobles usually went to the auction houses or the various guilds. Nie Tian and Xian Miao Miao were strolling together. Suddenly, Nie Tian's gaze was attracted by a piece of scrap metal on a stall. A strange expression flashed across his eyes, and they shone brightly. Meteoric iron. Looking at that piece of scrap metal, Nie Tian's eyes widened. He never thought that he would actually encounter meteoric iron here. Meteoric iron was meteoric iron that fell from the world outside the heaven realm, and it usually carried the terrifying power of thunder. The power of thunder, this was the power that Nie Tian needed. If the meteoric iron was integrated into the sword Absolute Heaven Slash, combined with the power of thunder in Nietion's body, it would definitely allow Nietion's sword intent to display a more terrifying power. Big brother Nietion, what's wrong with you? Xian Miao Miao saw Nietion staring at a piece of scrap metal in a daze. She couldn't help but ask curiously. I'm fine. Nietion immediately reacted. The corner of his mouth twitched and he came to the stall. The stall owner was an old man in his 60s or 70s, with a goatee. He looked very kind, and his eyes were slightly closed, as if he was asleep. Cough cough. Nietion coughed twice, and without beating around the bush, he said directly, Old man, I want to buy this piece of meteoric iron. The stall owner opened his eyes slightly, and the moment he saw Nietion, a strange look appeared in his eyes, but this look disappeared in a flash, and he immediately said in a muffled voice, This iron is not for sale. Not for sale? Nietion was slightly stunned, and then he immediately frowned and said, You are the owner of the stall. If you are not for sale, why are you taking it out? Seeing that Nietion was a little anxious, the stall owner laughed and said, This iron is used by me to occupy the stall, can't I? Nietion's eyes slightly narrowed, looking at the old man's goatee sticking up high, and his lungs were about to explode from anger. Meteoric iron is actually used to occupy the stall. Isn't this a reckless waste of God's gift? Master, this old man is strange. At this time, Corpse Demon Lord's voice suddenly sounded out, reminding Nietion. Nietion was slightly stunned, and his divine sense probed over, but he felt that the other party's mental strength was like a vast ocean, unfathomable. Such powerful mental strength. Nietion was quite shocked, his gaze trembling slightly. He was currently also at rank 70 mental strength, but when he sensed the old man, he actually could not sense anything, and his divine sense directly bounced back. Nietion reckoned that this old man's mental strength was at least above rank 80. Such terrifying mental strength, ever since Nietion reincarnated, he had only seen it on one person, and that was the rank 8 sealer, Sun Hai. Without a doubt, the old man in front of him was definitely a high-level alchemist or artifact refiner. Such a character, but hiding in the city to set up a stall, it was really rare. Little fella, there's always someone better out there. Your mental strength talent is very strong, but this old man isn't bad either. Don't test me randomly, the stall owner chuckled, but his tone was extremely amiable, looking at Nietion with a scorching gaze. Old mister, I was rash. Nietion smiled slightly and said, This piece of meteoric iron is very important to me. Old mister, please part with it. I can accept any price. Since the other party's mental strength was so terrifying, he clearly knew that this piece of meteoric iron was not an ordinary item. If Nietion still had the mentality of picking up scraps, then he would make a fool of himself. Any price is acceptable. The stall owner stroked his beard and chuckled, suddenly asking, Little fella, do you have a teacher? I want to meet him. Nietion went blank for a moment before realization dawned on him. Meet my master? No wonder he felt that this old man's gaze was not right just now, so it turned out that he had designs on him. If Nietion's guess was right, this old man wanted to take him in as a disciple. Nietion's mental strength was at the 70th level. To have such a high mental strength at such a young age was really incredible. No wonder this old man would want to take him in as a disciple. At this time, Nietion suddenly figured something out. This old man set up a stall in the city, and he deliberately put out the meteoric iron. It must be to attract people with intentions. This old man was using the meteoric iron to fish. After figuring this out, Nietion couldn't help but smile and said, Old mister, to tell you the truth, I'm an alchemist, and I've only dabbled a little in the art of refining. My interest is not in refining. I appreciate old mister's good intentions. Huh! The old man was startled, and he jumped up. His goatee was raised high, like a child in a fit of pique, and he shouted angrily, Little fella, what do you mean by that? This old man didn't say anything, and I don't have any good intentions. The moment the old man stood up, his face suddenly changed. He became young, his complexion ruddy, and he was in high spirits. There was no sign of old age at all. Chapter 743. The moment the old man stood up, his face changed. His old appearance was swept away, and it was as if he had suddenly become several decades younger. Nietion's eyes narrowed. This old man had obviously used some kind of disguise technique to disguise himself as an ordinary person. Rank 80 mental power, he should be at least a heaven evolution realm warrior. He shouldn't look so old. Xian Miao Miao screamed when she saw the old man's face. A name appeared in her mind, Hua Jia. Xian Miao Miao had never seen Hua Jia before, but she had seen his portrait in the Craftsman's Guild. The old man in front of her was Xian Yu Empire's #1 craftsman, Hua Jia. Little girl, don't say it. Just as Xian Miao Miao was about to say it, the old man shouted and interrupted her. Old man, you really are Hua Jia. Nietion smiled. He had been guessing the old man's identity and thought of Hua Jia. After all, there were very few rank 8 craftsmen in the Xian Yu Empire. However, Nietion wasn't sure. Seeing Xian Miao Miao and Hua Jia's reaction, he was sure of Hua Jia's identity. This old man was interesting. He got a piece of meteoric iron and hid in the market to catch apprentices. But this method was not bad. There weren't many people who could recognize meteoric iron. My lord, you really are. Xian Miao Miao covered her mouth with her eyes wide open. She was so excited that she didn't know what to say. Oh my God, Hua Jia, the legendary #1 craftsman in the Xian Yu Empire, was right in front of her. How could Xian Miao Miao not be excited? Little girl, do I not look like the portrait? Hua Jia smiled and looked at Nietion strangely. He said, Little guy, you have a good eye. If I'm not wrong, your wife is from the Xian family, right? My lord, you misunderstood. I just met brother Nietion. Xian Miao Miao blushed and quickly explained. Nietion was slightly stunned. He said, How did Master Hua know that Miao Miao is from the Xian family? Xian Miao Miao was not a member of the Xian family's royal lineage, but Hua Jia could tell her identity at a glance. It was a little strange. Hua Jia was also stunned. He chuckled and said, She has the Xian family's bloodline power in her body, and it is very strong. This old man has seen countless descendants of the Xian family, but none of them have a bloodline as dense as hers. Bloodline power? Nietion was stunned. He didn't know that the Xian family had bloodline power. Nietion had already witnessed the power of bloodlines from Qianlong Yingjing, Qianlong Yinghong, and the others. The Qianlong family's bloodline power was the divine prison black flames. Nietion was curious about the Xian family's bloodline power. My lord, are you sure you're not mistaken? I am indeed a member of the Xian family, but our family has been expelled from the imperial city for many generations. It is impossible for our bloodline to be passed down in our bodies. At this time, Xian Miao Miao slightly frowned and said doubtfully, Moreover, I've never felt the power of bloodline since I was born. My lord must have seen wrongly. Seen wrongly? Hua Jia let out a strange cry and seemed to be a little angry. He said, Little girl, this old man will never see wrongly. You can't feel the power of bloodline because your bloodline seal has not been broken. Bloodline seal? Xian Miao Miao and Nietion were stunned at the same time. Could it be? At this time, Nietion suddenly thought of something, and his expression changed. Yes. Hua Jia didn't wait for Nietion to finish and nodded heavily. He said, The Xian family's bloodline power is different from ordinary bloodline power. There is a seal in the bloodline, and the stronger the bloodline power, the stronger the bloodline seal. This little girl's bloodline seal has not been broken, so of course she can't feel the power of bloodline. As I thought, Nietion exclaimed in his heart. He had heard of bloodline seals before, and he knew that only extremely powerful bloodlines would have seals. Xian Miao Miao's bloodline seal undoubtedly meant that her bloodline power was extremely powerful. It was definitely not weaker than the Qianlong family's divine prison black flames. What a pity! Huojia looked at Xian Miao Miao and shook his head with a sigh. If she was born in the main bloodline of the Xian family, and her bloodline seal was broken when she was born, she would definitely be a genius. I've seen the top genius of the Xian family, Xian Shao, a few years ago. Even his bloodline power was not as strong as this little girl. Sigh. What a pity. Crown Prince Xian Shao, one of the legendary 9 demons. Xian Miao Miao exclaimed when she heard the name. Xian Shao, this name was too famous. Not only was he the crown prince of the mystic Moon Empire, but he was also one of the 9 demons of the Shumi world. Xian Miao Miao felt extremely flattered that Huojia had mentioned her and Crown Prince Xian Shao together. Nie Tian was startled. This was the second time he had heard the name 9 demons. It seemed like Qianlong Ying was the leader of the 9 demons. It seemed like the 9 demons were the top 9 geniuses of the Shumi world, just like the 3 great geniuses of the Shumi spirit capital. However, he was not concerned about the 9 demons. He asked, Master Hua, can the bloodline seal in Miss Miao Miao's body not be broken now? Nie Tian knew that even if Xian Miao Miao's bloodline seal was broken now, it would be hard for her to compare to Crown Prince Xian Shao. She had already missed the best time to cultivate her bloodline power. However, breaking the bloodline seal was always beneficial. At least it would allow Xian Miao Miao to have more innate abilities. Huojia chuckled and said, Little fella, the bloodline seal in this little girl's body has already stabilized. It's easier said than done to break it. In this old man's opinion, in order to break her bloodline seal, you'll need at least a Tier 8 sealer. Tier 8 sealer. At this point, Huojia could not help but gulp. There was not a single Tier 7 sealer in the entire Mystic Moon Empire, let alone a Tier 8 sealer. It was no exaggeration to say that the status of a Tier 8 sealer was higher than a Tier 8 blacksmith. Even the Mystic Moon Emperor might not be able to invite a Tier 8 sealer. Tier 8 sealer. Of course, Nie Tian was not frightened. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly as he murmured, I happen to know a Tier 8 sealer. I believe he'll be very willing to help. You know a Tier 8 sealer? Huojia was stunned and immediately screamed. The surrounding crowd suddenly looked over, and Huojia immediately lowered his head. If people saw a dignified Tier 8 blacksmith setting up a stall here, he would lose a lot of face. Really? Xian Miao Miao also looked at Nie Tian, unable to conceal the anticipation in her eyes. She understood what a Tier 8 sealer meant, and her heart was in complete despair. Nie Tian's words rekindled her hope. Really? Nie Tian nodded slightly and smiled confidently. Don't worry. Leave the matter of the bloodline seal in your body to me. Xian Miao Miao nodded heavily, trusting Nie Tian's words. Huojia shook his head with a smile, and his face reverted back to its old appearance. Clearly, he didn't trust Nie Tian's words. At this moment, Nie Tian suddenly looked at Huojia with a strange expression, and the corners of his mouth slowly rose. Xian Miao Miao's current situation wasn't very good. If the matter between Xian Qi and Yunmu was known by others, the Xian family castle would be in danger. If Huojia was willing to help, Xian Miao Miao would be much safer. Chapter 744. Brat, why are you looking at me like this? Huojia's scalp went numb from Nie Tian's stare, and he snapped. Master Hua, don't you want to take a disciple? What do you think of Miss Miao Miao? Nie Tian didn't beat around the bush and asked directly. Her. Huojia was surprised. He glanced at Xian Miao with a disdainful expression and laughed. If her mental energy is half as strong as yours, I will take her as my disciple. Xian Miao's expression was slightly awkward. She knew that both alchemists and blacksmiths had high requirements for a martial artist's mental energy. Since Nie Tian was an alchemist, his mental energy was of course very high. Xian Miao could also see that Hua Jia wanted to take Nie Tian as his disciple, but Nie Tian was unwilling. Hua Jia was the #1 blacksmith in the Black Moon Empire, and he could be ranked top 10 in the entire Sumer world. He showed a strong desire to take a disciple, which was the dream of thousands of martial artists. However, Nie Tian was unwilling. If the young blacksmiths in the Black Moon Empire saw this scene, they would definitely want to hammer Nie Tian to death. In fact, Xian Miao's mental energy talent was not bad, and she was now at rank 27. Unfortunately, compared to a true genius in mental energy, she was still far behind. Master Hua, it's a deal. Nie Tian had already expected Hua Jia's reaction, and he smiled slyly. It's a deal. Hua Jia was slightly startled, and before he could react, he asked, "What do you mean?" Nie Tian smiled indifferently, and his eyes were filled with confidence as he said, "Within a month, Miao Miao's mental energy will reach rank 35, and you will have to take her as your disciple." Hua Jia was speechless. He had just said it casually, but Nie Tian took it seriously. How cunning. However, he thought about it and laughed. It's a deal then. Mental energy needs to be accumulated over a long period of time. How can it be improved so easily? This old man doesn't believe that you can raise the little girl's spiritual power to the 8th stage within a month. Let's wait and see. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth rose, full of confidence. Master Hua, I have another request. Nie Tian's eyes flickered as he smiled strangely. Fire armor was very straightforward. Nie Tian nodded with a smile and said, Master Hua, I want you to announce to the public that Xian Miao Miao is now your disciple, and that you want to hold an apprenticeship ceremony in public. Fire armor raised his eyebrows. His goatee split into two as he sneered. Little brat, are you that confident? Yes. Nie Tian nodded heavily and said, If Miao Miao's mental power doesn't reach rank 35 in a month, I'll take you as my teacher. What do you think? Really? Fire Armor's eyes lit up as he stared blankly. I, Nie Tian, will never go back on my words. Nie Tian's face was indifferent, his whole body releasing a domineering confidence. Good. Fire Armor excitedly slapped his thigh and laughed heartily. Haha, this old man likes yous like you. You have courage. Fire Armor didn't believe that Nie Tian could raise Xian Miao Miao's mental power to the 8th stage in a month. It was simply impossible. He was already prepared to take Nie Tian as his disciple in a month. Fire Armor was so happy to be able to take in a disciple with such monstrous mental power. Nie Tian smiled faintly. He naturally only dared to bet with Fire Armor because he was completely confident. Nie Tian had asked Fire Armor to announce that he would take Xian Miao Miao as his disciple in advance because he wanted to find a big tree for her. With Fire Armor's support, even if the matter between Xian Qi and Yunmu was exposed, the Black Moon Imperial family and Yun family wouldn't dare to attack the Xian family's castle, let alone harm Xian Miao Miao. Then this piece of heavenly profound iron. Nie Tian's gaze shifted to the piece of heavenly profound iron. I'll give it to you. Fire Armor laughed and said, Just treat it as a greeting gift from your master. Nie Tian was speechless. This old man was very confident and thought that he had already won. Nie Tian took out Heaven's severing sword and handed it to Fire Armor. Master Fire, my sword's grade is too low. I want to ask you to fuse the heavenly profound iron into it to raise its grade. Fire Armor took the Heaven's severing sword and carefully caressed it. His expression became somewhat awkward. The material of this sword is very strange. It's a material I've never seen before. If I fuse the heavenly profound iron into it, I can only raise the grade of this sword to the 7th grade. But if I just use the heavenly profound iron to refine a sword, I'm confident that I can refine an 8th grade spirit weapon. There's no need to refine it. I only want this sword. Nie Tian solemnly nodded with a solemn expression. Heaven's severing sword was his personal sword in the heavenly world. To be able to encounter it again after his rebirth was a sign of the fate between a sword user and a sword. Alright. Since Nye Tian was so straightforward, Fire Armor naturally wouldn't object. He kept the heaven-severing sword and chuckled. You little brat, you haven't even acknowledged me as your master yet. You're asking me to do such a big thing for you. You're really impolite. Nye Tian shook his head slightly and asked, Master Fire, how long will it take you to reforge this sword? Fire Armor's eyes narrowed. He thought for a while and said, The heavenly profound iron is very difficult to refine. It's not easy to fuse it into an old sword either. I'll need half a month. Half a month. Nye Tian pondered for a while and immediately cupped his hands. Thank you. During this half a month, Nye Tian happened to stay in the Black Moon Empire. He helped Xian Miao Miao improve her mental strength while meeting the geniuses of the 4 academies. As for Sun Hai and Jean de Bao, Nye Tian believed that they would be fine. Nye Tian and Fire Armor agreed to meet at the Blacksmith Guild tomorrow. At that time, the latter would hold an official apprenticeship ceremony for Xian Miao Miao. After that, Nye Tian and Xian Miao Miao bade farewell to Fire Armor and headed to the Blue Dragon Academy. Along the way, Nye Tian inquired about Xian Miao Miao's mental strength cultivation. He found out that the latter had not gone through real mental strength cultivation. Generally speaking, ordinary martial artists who did not cultivate their mental strength would have a mental strength between level 10 to level 20. Xian Miao Miao's mental strength was level 27, which was considered very high. It was because of this that Nye Tian suggested to let Xian Miao Miao worship Fire Armor as her master. Nye Tian guessed that the reason why Xian Miao Miao's mental strength was so high should be related to the bloodline seal in her body. He was very curious about the power of the Xian family's bloodline. It actually came with a seal. After a while, the two arrived outside the Blue Dragon Academy. There were 2 huge stone pillars with dragon carvings at the gate. They were 100 meters tall and looked very imposing. Brother Nye Tian, let's go in. Xian Miao Miao giggled and led the way. She would become Fire Armor's disciple tomorrow. Of course she was happy. Stop. Just as Nye Tian and Xian Miao Miao stepped into the academy, a cold voice suddenly sounded. Huh! Nye Tian was slightly stunned. He looked towards the direction of the voice and saw a handsome young man with a murderous look in his eyes. What's the matter? Nye Tian's face was slightly cold as he asked in a deep voice. Chapter 745. Huh! Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He did not expect that the other party would attack him directly with all his strength, not giving him a chance to speak. Brother Nye Tian, be careful! Xian Miao Miao exclaimed, her little face extremely nervous. Nye Tian's face was calm. The yuan meridians in his body were operating, and a dark blue halo appeared outside his body. Bang! The mighty palm strike landed on the dark blue aura around Nye Tian, giving rise to a muffled sound. Then, like a clay ox sinking into the sea, it disappeared mysteriously. How is this possible? The man exclaimed in astonishment. He had exerted all of his strength to launch a palm strike, yet it didn't cause any damage to Nye Tian. This was too strange. Senior brother Zhou, this guy is very strong. You have to be careful. At this time, a slim figure appeared and warned in a sharp voice. It's you. Nye Tian saw a familiar face, Huang Xianer, and immediately understood what was going on. Xian Miao Miao said that Huang Xianer was one of the 4 great beauties in the inner sect of Blue Dragon College. There were countless people pursuing her in the inner sect. Zhou Li, who attacked Nye Tian, must be one of Huang Xianer's many pursuers. Senior brother Zhou Li, what are you doing? Xian Miao Miao calmed down when she saw that Nye Tian was fine. She looked at Zhou Li with a slight anger and said, When did the college stipulate that outsiders are not allowed to enter? Why didn't I know? Blue Dragon College never had a rule that outsiders were prohibited from entering. Zhou Li's words were completely false. Jolie put away his surprise and looked at Nye Tian coldly. The killing intent in his eyes intensified as if Nye Tian was his irreconcilable enemy. He said coldly, "I am in charge of guarding the college today. If I say outsiders are not allowed to enter, then they are not allowed to enter." Jolie had already thought about it just now. Killing Nye Tian with one palm would definitely please Huang Xian'er. Anyway, Nye Tian was a nobody. It didn't matter if he died. But he did not expect that Nye Tian, who was only at the first level of heaven evolution, could easily take the palm of a third level of heaven evolution warrior. It was too strange. Oh! Nye Tian raised his eyebrows and revealed a strange smile. He lightly said, "I'm afraid it's not that you don't want outsiders to enter, but you don't want me to enter." Jolie was simply looking for trouble. Even a fool could tell that he was here for Nye Tian. At this time, many people had gathered around them. They looked at Nye Tian and Jolie and discussed in low voices. "Look, that's senior brother Jolie from the inner sect. He's really strong. Senior brother Jolie is ranked 15th on the Azure Dragon Earth board. Who is that brat opposite him? Why is he fighting with him? It should be for senior sister Huang Xian'er. Senior sister Xian'er is as beautiful as a flower, and senior brother Jolie has admired her for a long time. I don't know where that brat came from, but he still wants to pursue senior sister Xian. How can senior brother Jolie tolerate him?" Nye Tian was speechless as he listened to the discussions of the people around him. These people's imaginations were really rich. Although Huang Xian'er was beautiful, Nye Tian did not fancy her. Speaking of which, Nye Tian was Huang Xian'er's savior, but the latter actually found someone to kill him. Even if she was devastatingly beautiful, Nye Tian would not look at such a venomous woman. "I just won't let you in. What can you do?" Jolie roared angrily. Even if Nye Tian had withstood his palm just now, it did not mean that he could really fight with him. After all, he was at the third level of heavenly evolution. Why would he be afraid of a first-level heavenly evolution warrior? Nye Tian's gaze tightened slightly. He glanced at Jolie and said coldly, "I don't care if you like to be someone else's dog. But if you bite me, I'll definitely make you regret it." "Regret?" Jolie shrieked and said coldly, Jolie, will do anything, but I won't do anything that I'll regret." As his insolent voice fell, Jolie attacked again. Clouds of yellow mist surged above his palm, looking extremely strange. The next moment, Jolie struck out with his palm. Immediately, yellow sand surged and dust filled the sky. A palm made of sand actually appeared in the void and directly grabbed at Nye Tian, wanting to tear him into pieces. The earth element is too weak. Nye Tian did not even look at it. He directly punched out. The void suddenly shook, and a huge golden fist shadow appeared. It was actually flowing with a terrifying electric current. Like a sharp arrow piercing through sandpaper, there was a soft sound in the air. The sand palm directly collapsed, and the golden fist shadow bombarded out. A miserable howl rang out, and Jolie was directly sent flying. After landing, he drew a deep mark on the ground that was more than 10 meters long before he stopped. The sudden scene caused the entire place to fall into a dead silence. Countless eyes looked at Nye Tian in disbelief. How did he do it? How was it possible for a first-level heavenly evolution martial artist to send a third-level heavenly evolution martial artist flying with one punch? Moreover, Jolie had attacked first and taken the initiative. Otherwise, Jolie would definitely be a corpse. Only Xian Miao, who was behind Nye Tian, was considered calm. She had personally seen Nye Tian kill the armored one-horned rhinoceros with one sword and even saw Nye Tian massacre Xian Qi and the others. Thus, she was already used to it. After a long time, the crowd simultaneously gasped, feeling that even their tailbones were ice cold. "Brat, you!" At this moment, Jolie crawled up. He had just opened his mouth to speak, but before he could finish, he vomited a mouthful of blood. "What about me?" Nie Tian raised his eyebrows and smiled. With a face full of disdain and mockery, he said, "Let me tell you, I don't care if you like to be a dog, but please don't bite me." Jolie's strength was still below Xianqi's, and Nie Tian had already shown mercy. Otherwise, Jolie would not have been able to stand at all. After all, this was the Tsang Dragon Academy, and Nie Tian didn't want to be too ostentatious. When the crowd heard Nie Tian's words, their eyes couldn't help but tremble violently. They looked at him with deep fear. Just now, Jolie had said that he would do anything, but not anything that he would regret. But now it was more like a huge sarcasm. The 15th place on the Tsang Dragon Earth leaderboard is just SOSO. Nie Tianling sneered, "Meow meow, let's go." After that, he didn't even look at Jolie, smiled faintly, and turned to leave. "You are not allowed to." Jolie took a step forward, but before he could finish his sentence, he vomited another mouthful of blood. Trash. Huang Xianer, who was at the side, glanced at Jolie coldly, as if she wanted to kick the latter away. In order to please Huang Xianer, Jolie was not only beaten up by Nie Tian, but also made Huang Xianer hate him even more. He only had himself to blame for falling into such a situation. "Your Excellency, you are so arrogant." Just as Nie Tian and Xian Miao were about to leave, a voice broke through the air. The sound wave turned into a sharp blade in the air, with a billowing momentum, oppressing them. Chapter 746. Nie Tian threw a punch, and the thunder energy in his body surged out. An enormous thunder dragon appeared, and its might shook the heavens and earth. Bang! 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 A violent explosion came from the void. It was the collision of sound waves and thunder energy. It was abnormally violent. Good technique, surprisingly able to block my wind cloud roar. Interesting. The next instant, a figure landed gracefully. His gaze locked onto Nie Tian, and his words contained a hint of playfulness. Nie Tian looked at the newcomer. It was a young man in his 20s. He was dressed differently from the others. He was wearing a long black robe, and his handsome face was a little devilishly handsome. There was a restrained pressure in his eyes, which made people feel very uncomfortable. Yun Yu. When the crowd saw the black-robed man's face, they instantly cried out in surprise. Their gazes burned with fanaticism and worship. Elder brother Nie Tian. He is Yunmu's elder brother, Yun Yu. He is very powerful, ranked 10th on the Azure Dragon Earth ranking. After a moment of astonishment, Traveler snapped out of his daze and hastily whispered to Nie Tian, "You're right. Yunmu's elder brother, ranked 10th on the Azure Dragon Earth ranking." Nie Tian looked at Yun Yu and muttered to himself. No wonder he felt that the latter's face was somewhat familiar. It turned out that he looked very similar to Yunmu. Yun Yu looked at Nie Tian coldly and paused for a moment before saying, "Your distinguished self said that the 15th on the Azure Dragon Earth ranking is mediocre. I wonder if I, the 10th on the Azure Dragon Earth ranking, am qualified to fight with you?" Taking the initiative to fight. Nie Tian was somewhat surprised by Yun Yu's actions, but after thinking about it for a moment, he understood that Yun Yu wanted to use him to establish his might. Yun Yu's strength was the same as Jolie's, at the third layer of heaven evolution. However, his origin spirit was somewhat strange. It surprisingly had the sound attribute, which was a type of spirit. When the onlookers heard that Yun Yu was challenging Nie Tian, their gazes instantly became fervent. They all wanted to see who was stronger. "You want to fight me?" Nie Tian glanced at Yun Yu, his eyes filled with a strong sense of provocation. "You don't dare?" The corner of Yun Yu's mouth twitched. His expression was arrogant and he had the attitude of a superior. "Whether I dare or not is my business." Nie Tian suddenly calmed down and said, "I have no enmity with you, and this is the first time we've met. Why should I accept your challenge?" At this moment, Nie Tian didn't want to get into a conflict with Yun Yu. If he were to fight anyone that came to him, would he still be able to have peace in the Blue Dragon Academy? No grudges? Yun Yu coldly smiled, and his eagle-like eyes swept over Xian Miao Miao. He suddenly clamored, "She is my younger brother Yunmu's woman, but she was snatched away by you. Now we have enmity, don't we?" After saying that, Yunyu put on an arrogant posture and his eyes were full of frivolity. As soon as his words left his mouth, the entire place was deathly silent for a moment before it exploded into an uproar. Isn't she senior sister Xian Miao Miao? A few days ago, I saw her together with senior brother Yunmu, so how did she end up with this guy? Isn't that obvious? Senior sister Miao Miao climbed up a high branch, so she naturally ignored senior brother Yunmu. This guy, he surprisingly dares to snatch senior brother Yunmu's woman. He is truly audacious. Is the Yun family someone he can offend? Actually, this can't be blamed on him. Senior sister Miao Miao's beauty can topple a city, so if she pursues me, I won't be able to control myself. But I didn't realize that senior sister Miao Miao was such a fickle woman. The filthy words in the surroundings entered Xian Miao Miao's ears, and it was like steel needles stabbing into her heart. Yunyu, don't talk nonsense. There is nothing between me and Yunmu. Xian Miao Miao bit her lips until they bled, and tears of grievance welled up in her eyes. Nie Tian's gaze suddenly trembled, and a hint of killing intent flashed through his eyes. Shortly after, he smiled coldly and said, "Yunyu, I order you to immediately apologize to Miao Miao. Yunmu and Yunmu were really blood brothers. Both of them loved to lie through their teeth and ruin people's innocence." "Order me to apologize?" Yunyu sneered as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. He was the dignified 10th ranker of the Azure Dragon Earth ranking, a direct descendant of the Yun family, so how could he apologize to someone? "If I don't apologize, what can you do to me?" Yunyu raised his eyebrows, and the disdain in his eyes became even more pronounced. He was a member of the Yun family, and he was also in the Azure Dragon Academy, so what could Nie Tian do to him? What could he do to him? Moreover, he believed that Nie Tian wasn't his opponent. "I will say it again, apologize." Nie Tian suddenly calmed down and said word by word. At this instant, everyone felt an ice-cold killing intent fill the air. Nie Tian was like an icehouse, causing people to feel a bone-chilling cold. "Then I will also ask again, if I don't apologize, what can you do to me?" The smile on Yunyu's face became even more unbridled. Even if he sensed Nie Tian's killing intent, he was still insolent. "Then there is only one ending for you." Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and the corners of his lips curled up abruptly as he spat out a word, "Die! Die!" As soon as these ice-cold words left Nie Tian's mouth, he moved in the blink of an eye. 6th grade Astral Soul, Ghostly Slash. A chilling voice reverberated in the air, and Nie Tian's silhouette flickered in the air like a specter. With every step he took, a ghostly shadow would appear on the ground. Swish! In the blink of an eye, all the ghostly shadows suddenly rushed towards Yunyu. A blinding white light flashed in the air, and a bloody human head flew through the air. Nie Tian's silhouette returned to his original position. At the same time, Yunyu's body fell to the ground, and his head rolled off. On the ground, a pool of fresh blood slowly spread out. Yunyu, an inner disciple of the Azure Dragon Academy, ranked 10th on the Azure Dragon Earth ranking, and a direct descendant of the Yun family, was killed on the spot by Nie Tian without any chance to retaliate. The sudden scene caused the crowd to fall into a dead silence. Everyone stared blankly at the corpse on the ground, and all of them turned into stone statues, with no reaction for a long time. "Dead, dead? Senior Yunyu is dead." After a while, someone finally reacted and let out a shrill scream. SSS-. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air as they turned to look at Nie Tian. Their eyes were filled with shock, confusion, and even more apprehension. Nie Tian's strength was too strange. One move, just one move, and he killed Yunyu directly. The latter didn't even have the chance to scream before he died. However, this wasn't the most shocking thing. The most shocking thing was that Nie Tian actually killed Yunyu. Yunyu was a student of the Azure Dragon Academy, and also a member of the Yun family. Nie Tian killed Yunyu in public. Not to mention that the Long family wouldn't let him off, even the Azure Dragon Academy wouldn't let him off. Xian Miao Miao stared at Nie Tian with a pale face, and she was almost scared out of her wits. Ha! Brat, you killed Senior Yunyu. The Azure Dragon Academy and the Yun family won't let you off. You are dead meat. At this moment, a sharp laughter sounded. Huang Xian'er looked at Nie Tian viciously, gloating over his misfortune. Chapter 747. Don't! Huang Xian'er screamed when she sensed the coldness in Nie Tian's eyes. She couldn't move at all as she was enveloped by the powerful sword intent. Don't what? Nie Tian smirked and said coldly, Didn't you say that I'm dead for sure? It's not a bad idea to drag someone down with me before I die. Huang Xian'er was so scared that her face turned pale, and her eyes were filled with despair. She looked helplessly at the people around her and shouted, Come and save me. If anyone can save me, I will be with him. If Huang Xian'er shouted like this normally, there would be at least 800 people responding to her. Unfortunately, not only did no one dare to come forward, they all retreated. Nie Tian even dared to kill Yunyu. How could he show mercy to others? Bitch! Nie Tian's gaze swept over Huang Xian'er. He spat out a word coldly, and the sword intent enveloping Huang Xian'er rushed into her body, destroying her Yuan meridian. Nie Tian didn't want to dirty his hands by killing such a person. Huang Xian'er sat on the ground and sensed her body. Her face suddenly froze and turned ashen. Nie Tian destroyed her Yuan meridian. With her Yuan meridian destroyed, Huang Xian'er was no longer an inner disciple and would even be expelled from the Azure Dragon Institute. She could only be an ordinary person for the rest of her life. To her, this was a fate worse than death. Nie Tian no longer cared about Huang Xian'er, and his gaze gradually calmed down. Killing Yunyu was indeed a little impulsive, but since it was done, Nie Tian didn't regret it. Yunyu insulted mysterious Miao Miao. He deserved to die. Big brother Nie Tian, you should run. If the people from the Institute's law enforcement hall come, you won't be able to escape. Mysterious Miao Miao suddenly thought of something and said anxiously, Run. Nie Tian shook his head and smiled. Mysterious Miao Miao was still too naive. This was the Mystic Moon Imperial City. How could he escape? At this moment, Nie Tian suddenly looked up into the sky. His eyes narrowed slightly, and then he put two fingers together and suddenly pointed out. A stream of air-breaking energy flew out. Bang! A tyrannical finger force broke through the air. It was the Eastern Sovereign Finger that Nie Tian had not used for a long time. A muffled sound rang out in the empty air, followed by a groan. Several drops of blood fell from the air. There was actually someone hiding in the void. This person was discovered by Nie Tian and was injured. The crowd looked at the sky in shock. They had no idea what was going on. Kid, I'm not your enemy. We'll meet again. A voice rang out in Nie Tian's mind. It was a voice transmitted to him by someone in the void. Huh! Nie Tian was slightly stunned, but the aura in the air disappeared. He was holding a gold medal in his hand. It was the one he had just taken from the waist of that man. Nie Tian glanced at the gold medallion. There was a word written on it, Chio. Big brother Nie Tian, who is he? Mysterious Miao Miao reacted and looked at Nie Tian in surprise. I don't know either. Nie Tian shook his head slightly and smiled bitterly in his heart. He said he's not an enemy. Could it be that I still have friends in Black Moon Empire? Everyone get out of the way. Just as Nie Tian was puzzled, a furious voice rang out. More than 10 figures appeared in the distance. The crowd hurriedly made way. More than 10 black-clothed martial artists appeared and surrounded Nie Tian. More than 10 martial artists. Every one of them had a powerful aura. They were all at Heavenly Evolution Stage 3 and above. Heavens, it's the Law Enforcement Hall's people. Yunyu is dead. This alarmed the Law Enforcement Hall's people. This kid is finished. This kid is not from our Azure Dragon Academy. He actually dares to kill people in the Azure Dragon Academy. Even if he has 100 lives, it won't be enough." The crowd discussed animatedly. They looked at Nye Tian with cold eyes. Such a big lineup? Nye Tian looked at the surrounding black-clothed martial artists. There was not the slightest bit of nervousness on his face. Instead, he was even calmer. "What an arrogant kid. You dare to cause trouble in the Azure Dragon Academy? Leave your life behind." In the next moment, a vigorous voice rang out, following which a mighty palm pressed down from the sky. It was majestic and overwhelming. Nye Tian's gaze trembled slightly. The pressure above his head was extremely strong. Just that oppressive aura made him feel suffocated. The person who came was extremely powerful. He was definitely at the peak of the heavenly evolution stage. Mysterious yellow armor. Nye Tian did not hesitate. The Star Soul Tablet in the Primal Chaos Source Coffin released a powerful astral soul. Endless astral energy gushed out, forming a phantom of a golden armored giant around him. This was Nye Tian's 6th grade astral soul, mysterious yellow armor. After advancing to the heavenly evolution stage, Nye Tian was able to inscribe 6th grade astral souls. The ghost Shadow Slash that he used to kill Yunyu was a 6th grade astral soul. The power of a 6th grade astral soul was enough to contend against a high-level heavenly evolution stage cultivator. Earlier, Nye Tian had wasted an astral soul on Yunyu in a moment of anger. With his battle prowess, he could still kill Yunyu without using an astral soul. However, it would take some effort. A little loach wants to fight a flood dragon? Childish. Seeing that Nye Tian actually resisted, the figure in the sky became even more violent. A terrifying palm force pressed down like a mountain. Boom. Under the pressure of the palm force, it bombarded the mysterious yellow armor. With Nye Tian as the epicenter, a huge cloud of dust rose several meters into the air. In an instant, rocks and dust flew everywhere. Crack. In the next moment, a crisp sound rang out. A crack appeared on the mysterious yellow armor. Oh no! Nye Tian's eyes trembled. He immediately punched out. A lightning dragon soared into the sky, and a dragon's roar resounded. Bang! The mysterious yellow armor directly shattered. The lightning dragon blocked the majestic palm force. Under the pressure, the dragon's body was directly shattered. Nye Tian felt a powerful force descending. His chest shook violently, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. His body sank a few centimeters. Nye Tian stood still. His body shook slightly, and sword intent swept away the dust in the sky. A middle-aged man's face appeared in front of him. The middle-aged man had a slender figure and a large frame. His chest rose and fell violently. It was obvious that he was extremely furious. The corners of his eyes twitched, revealing a cold, killing intent. When he saw Nye Tian's figure clearly, the killing intent in his eyes intensified. At the same time, there was a trace of surprise. He was a 9th grade heavenly evolution stage cultivator. Under his palm, he couldn't even kill a 1st grade heavenly evolution stage cultivator. How was this possible? Elder Yun Zong. At this moment, the crowd saw the person's face clearly and exclaimed in surprise. This middle-aged man was none other than the Azure Dragon Academy's Law Enforcement Hall Elder, Yun Zong. However, Yun Zong had another identity, and that was Yun Yu's 3rd uncle. Big Brother Nye Tian. He is the Law Enforcement Hall Elder Yun Zong. He is also Yun Yu's 3rd uncle. Xian Miao Miao ignored the dust on his face and transmitted a message to Nye Tian. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. No wonder Yun Zong wanted to kill him the moment he arrived. It turned out that he was Yun Yu's 3rd uncle. Yun Zong's strength was very strong. He was at the peak of the heavenly evolution stage. He crushed Nye Tian's 6th grade astral soul with one palm. It was truly terrifying. However, Nye Tian wasn't afraid of him. If the two of them fought to the death, it was hard to say who would win. Chapter 748. The moment Yun Zong saw Yun Yu's corpse, his face stiffened, and his body began to tremble. He had not believed it when he heard that something had happened to Yun Yu. Now that he saw the corpse, the anger in his chest spread into endless killing intent. Yun Yu, an inner disciple of the Blue Dragon Academy and a direct descendant of the Yun family, had been killed in the academy. If the murderer did not pay the price, the Blue Dragon Academy and the Yun family would lose face. "Damn bastard, I'll kill you!" Yun Zong bellowed and took a step forward. His aura spread, filling the air with endless killing intent that enveloped Nye Tian. So powerful! The crowd's eyes trembled as they felt Yun Zong's determined killing intent. Their eyes burned as they looked at Nye Tian maliciously, certain that he was dead meat. Nye Tian had withstood Yun Zong's attack, but this did not mean that he had the ability to fight him. One of them was at the first level of heavenly evolution, and the other was at the 9th level of heavenly evolution. There was a world of difference. "You want to kill me?" Nye Tian was slightly stunned. A terrifying sword intent surged around him. He was like a sharp sword, tearing apart the surging killing intent. "Bastard, you killed someone in the Blue Dragon Academy. I'll kill you now." Yun Zong was extremely furious. Nye Tian had killed his nephew, so he had to kill Nye Tian no matter what. "Then let's fight." Nye Tian's eyes flashed. He did not say anything else but roared angrily. His battle intent was wild. He still had 2 star souls, but he did not plan to use them. Yun Zong was too powerful. Even a 6th level star soul could not do anything to him. If he wanted to fight Yun Zong, he would have to use more powerful trump cards. "Fight!" Yun Zong smiled coldly. His killing intent solidified. He took a step forward, and his voice became hoarse as he roared, "Go to hell!" Boom! The surrounding void shook violently as the palm blasted out. A majestic palm shadow descended from the void with a mighty momentum. What powerful strength! Is this the power of a peak heavenly evolution warrior? Everyone felt the incoming palm wind and retreated hundreds of meters away. Their eyes couldn't help but shiver. The power of a peak heavenly evolution martial artist's palm strike was already so powerful. What about a heaven realm martial artist? Everyone held their breath. It was as if a huge rock was pressing down on their chests, and they didn't dare to make a single sound. Nye Tian looked calm and cold at Yun Zong. There was no emotion in his eyes. Yun Zong was very powerful, but it was not enough to make Nye Tian fear him. "Thunder Dragon, kill!" Nye Tian bellowed furiously, and an endless power of lightning surged out from his body. His entire body was bathed in lightning, making him look like a god of lightning. The blinding power of thunder surged in the void, instantly condensing into 9 thunder dragons. Their auras were wild and wild, bringing with them an extremely oppressive force. Hiss! Upon seeing this, everyone sucked in a breath of cold air and looked at Nye Tian with disbelief in their eyes. Was he still a first-level heaven evolution martial artist? How could he explode with such terrifying power? Xian Miao Miao was also stunned. Only now did she realize that killing the armored one-horned rhinoceros, torturing Xian Qi and Yun Mu, as well as defeating Zhou Li and killing Yun Yu weren't Nye Tian's true strength. At this moment, Nye Tian revealed his true terrifying combat power. However, she was wrong. This wasn't Nye Tian's strongest combat power. He had yet to reveal his strongest trump card. "You're courting death." Yun Zong felt humiliated when he saw that Nye Tian dared to counterattack. The murderous intent in his eyes intensified. Boom! In the void, the majestic palm shadow collided with the thunder dragons, and an endless amount of power surged out. Bang! The next moment there was a dull sound. Nye Tian was sent flying. He retreated dozens of meters, and blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He steadied himself and smiled bitterly. The power of a 9th-level heaven evolution martial artist is indeed terrifying. Even the 9 thunder dragons couldn't block Yunzong's palm. If not for the fact that Nie Tian had the 9-star dragon vein constitution and awakened the power of 100 billion stars in his body, making his physique far stronger than an ordinary martial artist's, he would have found it very difficult to stand up now. When Yunzong saw that Nie Tian was only lightly injured and wasn't dead, his gaze tightened, and he couldn't help but reveal a shocked expression. Who exactly was Nie Tian? How could he be so powerful that he could withstand 2 palm strikes in a row? He's not dead. The crowd exclaimed in unison as they stared at Nie Tian in a daze. Many of them were prepared to see Nie Tian being smashed into meat paste by the palm strike. Who would have thought that Nie Tian was still alive? Nie Tian's strength was too strange. It subverted everyone's understanding of a first-level heaven evolution martial artist. When such a monstrous person grew up, it was simply unimaginable. At that moment, thousands of meters away, a figure was watching the battle between Nie Tian and Yunzong from afar. This person looked to be around 20 years old and had delicate features. He was dressed in white and gave off a refined and courteous vibe. However, his eyes were sharp and revealed a complicated emotion. "Your Highness, this is the person I told you about." A voice rang out in the void. It was boundless, but no one appeared. If Nie Tian heard this voice, he would be able to tell that the person who spoke was the person he had injured with a finger. Nie Tian even took a gold medal from this person. The word Chiu was carved on it. "Your injury was caused by him?" the man in white asked calmly. His voice was calm and had a faint magnetism that made people feel very comfortable. "I was careless. I didn't expect him to be able to detect my presence." The voice in the void sounded a little nervous. "Very good." The man in white nodded slightly and said, "You did well. He is the person I was looking for." "Your Highness is wise." The voice in the void said, "I will go find Elder Qi right now and ask him to stop the battle." "No hurry." The man in white waved his hand slightly and locked his sharp eyes on Nie Tian. He smiled playfully and said, "Let him continue to play with Yunzong." "Your Highness, I'm afraid." The voice in the void sounded worried, but he was interrupted before he could finish. The man in white smiled faintly and said, "His strength is more than that. I can feel that there is a very powerful force in his body. Even my bloodline seal is afraid of it." Gulp. The sound of someone swallowing saliva was suddenly heard in the void. That person was very shocked. The man in white had a very high status. He was the 19th prince of the Xian Yu Empire, Xian Qiu. What kind of power was hidden in Nie Tian that even Prince Xian Qiu's bloodline seal was afraid of? Prince Xian Qiu was second only to Prince Xian Shao in the Xian Yu imperial family. His evaluation of Nie Tian was too high. At that moment, Nie Tian took a few steps forward, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. With an extremely provocative tone, he said indifferently, "A 9th-level heavenly evolution martial artist is only SOSO. With Nie Tian's current recovery ability, the heavenly evolution true meaning, and the 9-star dragon vein constitution, he could recover in the blink of an eye as long as it was not a fatal injury." "Brat, you're courting death." Yunzong's face turned red and he was extremely embarrassed. Chapter 749. Yunzong stared coldly at Nie Tian. His vicious gaze seemed to want to tear the latter into pieces. The more powerful Nie Tian was, the more Yunzong wanted to kill him. Yunzong had already made up his mind to kill Nie Tian no matter what price he had to pay today. If a person like Nie Tian was allowed to grow, the consequences would be dire. "Little bastard, you're asking for it. Don't blame me." Yunzong stared at Nie Tian. His eyes turned even colder, and his vicious voice rolled out of his throat. His body shook and a huge black tree appeared behind him. The moment the huge black tree appeared, a terrifying, scorching aura spread out for thousands of meters. In midair, the huge black tree seemed to have a life of its own. It grew towards the sky, waving its trunk in the air like a long black snake, releasing a violent aura. The strangest thing was that the huge black tree was surrounded by a layer of black light. It was like a flame, releasing a scorching aura. Giant spirit true body. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed when he saw this. He did not expect that Yun Zong would even use the giant spirit true body to kill him. The huge black tree was Yun Zong's giant spirit true body, the black flame dragon sandalwood. The black flame dragon sandalwood was a wood spirit, but it was fire elemental. This was very rare. A fire elemental wood spirit. Interesting. Nie Tian smiled faintly. He did not look nervous at all. Instead, he looked very playful. He was considering whether to let the 9th-level Chaos Beast appear. The 9th-level Chaos Beast had not come out for a long time. It was probably a little lonely. When a martial artist cultivated, they would condense the giant spirit true body at the giant spirit realm. That was the strongest period of the giant spirit true body. After that, the giant spirit true body would be greatly strengthened at the true energy realm, divine wheel realm, heaven evolution realm, and heaven realm. However, martial artists would not use the giant spirit true body unless they were in a critical situation. This was because the giant spirit true body was too close to the martial artist. Once it was injured, the martial artist's body would be injured, and even the martial artist's foundation would be damaged. But after reaching the heavenly emperor realm, the giant spirit true body would grow to its ultimate state. Moreover, the martial artist's strength would have already reached the peak. Even if the giant spirit true body was injured, as long as the martial artist didn't die, it wouldn't damage the martial artist's foundation. Therefore, giant spirit realm martial artists and heavenly emperor realm martial artists liked to use the giant spirit true body. Martial artists of other realms generally did not use the giant spirit true body. Currently, Nie Tian's strongest trump cards were the Heaven Shrouding Totem and the Spirit Dragon Ring. However, he did not want to use either of them. The Heaven Shrouding Totem was too shocking. It could only be used as a last resort. As for the Spirit Dragon Ring, it was even more impossible for him to use it. If other people also thought that he was from the 10,000 Demons Dragon Abyss, it would be terrible. He could tell from Xian Miao Miao's words that the Sacred Light territory and the Myriad Demons territory were enemies. If someone from the 10,000 Demons Dragon Abyss appeared in the Black Moon Empire, he would definitely become the target of public criticism. Elder Yunzong is using the giant spirit true body. The crowd reacted and exclaimed. In order to kill a first heaven evolution realm martial artist, Yunzong actually used the giant spirit true body. He was really going all out. The moment the black flame dragon sandalwood appeared, the surrounding space suddenly tightened. It was as if an invisible force was tearing the void apart. Everyone was shocked. They could not withstand the pressure of the black flame dragon sandalwood and retreated together. Meanwhile, Prince Xianqiu, who had been watching the battle from afar, could not help but tremble when he saw this scene. He immediately said, "Crow, go and inform Elder Qi. Ask him to come quickly." Even though Yunzong was using the giant spirit true body, Xianqiu could no longer remain calm. He did not want anything to happen to Nie Tian because the latter was very useful to him. "Yes." In the void, the crow replied, and its aura disappeared. Xianqiu did not want to show himself directly. Therefore, he asked Crow to invite the great elder of the Blue Dragon Academy's Law Enforcement Hall, Qi. Qi should be able to protect Nie Tian's life if he appeared. Xianqiu looked at Nie Tian with a burning gaze. He actually looked a little nervous. He secretly prayed that Nie Tian could hold on. He did not want to make a move now. The crowd retreated thousands of meters away. They looked at the black flame dragon sandalwood in midair with terrified expressions. "Little bastard, kneel." All of a sudden, Yunzong let out a furious roar. The several hundred-meter-long black flame dragon sandalwood shook violently, and then blossomed with black light. An enormous aura descended from the sky, pressing down on Nie Tian like a giant, invisible hand. Boom! As boundless pressure bore down on him, Nie Tian stamped his feet on the ground, and endless star power burst forth from his body, surging violently. Crack, crack, crack. The next moment, the blue stone under Nie Tian's feet shattered, and a series of terrifying cracks appeared on the ground. You want to compete with me in strength? Nie Tian felt the huge pressure above his head, but his eyes flashed with a sharp light. He had awakened the power of 100 billion stars in his body. His absolute strength exceeded 1,000 dragons. Even a warrior at the peak of the heavenly evolution realm might not have such strength. Nie Tian straightened his back. His entire body was enveloped by the astral shield, and he did not move. Kneel! Yunzong shouted. His aura surged again, and an even more crazy power pressed down. Boom! With Nie Tian as the center, an enormous force spread out, shattering all of the limestone within a radius of several hundred meters around him. A layer of broken rocks rose up from the ground, and endless turbid waves spread out madly. Nie Tian could feel the sudden increase in pressure. He could not help but frown. The 9 dragon veins were under huge pressure, as if they were about to be torn apart. The power of a warrior at the peak of the heavenly evolution realm was still very strong. Moreover, even though Yunzong had used the giant spirit true body, he would definitely give it his all. He would not give Nie Tian any chance. Pain! In an instant, a sharp pain spread throughout his body. Nie Tian felt as if all the meridians in his body were about to be torn apart. You little brat, kneel! Yunzong roared again when he saw Nie Tian's pained expression. The black flame dragon Sandalwood immediately bared its fangs and brandished its claws. Waves of black light surged and turned into an even more terrifying power that pressed down on Nie Tian. The crowd was stunned. They were not shocked by Yunzong's strength, but by Nie Tian's strength. He had used his physical body alone to resist the giant spirit true body of a warrior at the peak of the heavenly evolution realm. Was he really a first heaven evolution realm warrior? Big brother Nie Tian. Suddenly, a mysterious voice rang out. Her face was already covered in tears. Nie Tian did not panic at all under the huge pressure. His eyes were frighteningly calm. You want me to kneel? Impossible. In the next moment, a wisp of coldness flashed in Nie Tian's eyes, and his deep and furious roar resounded in the sky. He, Nie Tian, was the #1 war god in the heaven realm. He was at the peak of the sword Dao in the heaven realm. How could he kneel to trash like Yunzong? Yunzong was courting death by mentioning the word kneel in front of Nie Tian. Roar! Nie Tian's body suddenly trembled. He roared into the sky, and a vast, surging power erupted instantly. Chaos had descended, and all living beings submitted. The 9th-level Chaos Beast was a supreme primordial spirit that made all living beings prostrate. There was no reason for it to kneel. The earth-shattering roar was like the breaking of dawn. It pierced through the clouds and cracked rocks, shocking everyone. Chapter 750. The primal chaos had descended upon the world, and all living beings had submitted to it. How terrifying! The crowd stared at the crimson beast in front of them, their gazes trembling intensely. They could feel the origin spirits in their bodies trembling uncontrollably. This was a type of natural reverence when facing a supreme emperor, something they couldn't resist. In the distance, Xianqiu's eyes were also momentarily stunned. The Xian family's bloodline seal in his body suddenly trembled, as if it had sensed something extremely terrifying. It could not help but tremble. Just who is he? His origin spirit is actually so terrifying. Xianqiu's eyes trembled and the muscles on his face twisted together. He felt a strong threat from Nie Tian. It was extremely terrifying. At this moment, Xianqiu was certain that Nie Tian was the person he was looking for. On the other hand, the moment the 9th extreme chaos beast appeared, Yunzong suddenly felt an inexplicable tremble. The black flame sandalwood dragon primordial spirit seemed to sense some kind of terrifying threat and trembled violently. How is this possible? Yunzong's gaze froze for a moment, and his heart trembled. His black flame sandalwood dragon origin spirit was a 7th rank origin spirit, but it was actually trembling for no reason. This was too terrifying. Yunzong, do you want me to kneel? At the same time, Nie Tian's deep roar rang out. The 9-top chaos beast's body surged with a scarlet glow. From afar, it looked like it was bathed in fresh blood. The impact of such a scene was shocking. For a moment Yunzong was stunned. He opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. Yunzong, the one who should kneel is you. Nie Tian's angry roar rang out once again. Every word was sonorous and sonorous. Immediately, the 9 extreme chaos beast exploded with a surging power. Boom! Nie Tian's body shook, and the huge pressure on his head was instantly broken. Yunzong took a few steps back. The black light flowing on the black flame dragon sandalwood was suppressed by the power of the stars and began to shrink. In front of the 9 extreme chaos beast, the black flame's dragon sandalwood was completely suppressed. Just as the 9-level chaos beast broke free from the pressure, Nie Tian's eyes flashed sharply. He put 2 of his fingers together and pointed them forward. 2 streaks of air-breaking force attacked from the sky. Pooh! With 2 sounds of flesh being cut, Yunzong suddenly felt a sharp pain in his knees. He couldn't help but kneel on the ground. Yunzong knelt down. At this moment the space suddenly stopped. The entire place was deathly silent. Everyone's minds were blank as they stared at the scene in front of them in disbelief. Yunzong, the elder of the Blue Dragon Academy's Law Enforcement Hall, actually knelt before Nie Tian. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they wouldn't have believed it. Yunzong had just suppressed Nie Tian and had the upper hand, forcing him to kneel. However, once the 9th-level Chaos Beast appeared, Yunzong was completely suppressed. He was even forced to his knees by Nie Tian in one move. Interesting. Xian Qiu watched from afar. At this moment, he had completely calmed down, and he was determined to protect Nie Tian no matter what price he had to pay. Nie Tian looked at Yunzong with disdain. His eyes were cold as he shouted, "You want me to kneel, but the one kneeling is you. So what?" Nie Tian looked at Yunzong with disdain. His eyes were cold as he shouted coldly. The strength of a peak heavenly evolution warrior was terrifying. He had attacked Yunzong when he was stunned, which was equivalent to catching him off guard. Unfortunately, the domineering Dongwang finger had only injured Yunzong's knees. It hadn't caused him any serious injuries. If a warrior below the 5th level of the heavenly evolution realm was attacked by the Dongwang finger, their legs would definitely be crippled. Yunzong was stunned the moment he knelt down. After a few seconds, he suddenly reacted. He activated the vital meridians in his body, and the true will of heaven evolution surged into the wounds on his knees, instantly healing them. Yunzong stood up immediately. His face was extremely gloomy, and his expression became ferocious. He couldn't control himself and roared crazily. His breathing became heavier, more rapid, and more messy. His entire body trembled uncontrollably. His throat felt like it was blocked by countless maggots. It was suffocating, painful, and itchy. He wanted nothing more than to tear Nie Tian apart on the spot. He had never imagined that he, as the elder of the Law Enforcement Hall, would be beaten to his knees by a youth. He couldn't take this lying down. He couldn't take this humiliation. "Little bastard, you deserve to die." Yunzong's eyes suddenly turned cold, and he roared hoarsely. He was the elder of the Law Enforcement Hall. If he didn't kill Nie Tian today, how could he establish himself in the Blue Dragon Academy in the future? As he roared, Yunzong completely turned into a raging beast. The black flame dragon sandalwood behind him shook violently, and the surrounding power of heaven and earth seemed to be sucked dry in an instant. "Die! A violent voice rang out. Yunzong's entire body erupted with a bloody and violent aura. The power of heaven and earth was completely changed, and the space was pulled out of shape by an invisible force. Black flame poisonous dragon. Yunzong's figure was wild. He put his palms together and struck a strange pose. The next moment, the black flame dragon sandalwood shook violently, and the void trembled incessantly. Countless branches of the black flame dragon sandalwood danced in the air like countless black snakes, twining together and instantly forming a giant black dragon. Its entire body surged with a terrifying black splendor, releasing a destructive aura. Boom! A powerful aura surged, and the green stones on the ground were rolled up. Before they could touch the giant black dragon, they had already turned into powder. Seeing this, Nie Tian's eyes suddenly trembled. He felt an extremely terrifying force pressing down on him. Even a 9th-level chaos beast couldn't resist this power. Boom! Boom! There was a rumbling explosion in the void. Everywhere the black flame poisonous dragon went, a frightening deep pit appeared in the ground. Die! Yunzong looked like he had gone mad. His face was ferocious, and he stared coldly at Nie Tian. The black flame poisonous dragon set off a fierce wind, and its violent aura and bloody aura pressed down on Nie Tian. Yunzong had bet everything on this attack. He was determined to win. Nie Tian frowned slightly. His eyes flickered, and then he became determined. He had underestimated Yunzong. The black flame poisonous dragon was the latter's ultimate move. Lord Yunzong is angry. This brat is dead meat. The crowd's eyes trembled as they looked at the giant black dragon in the void. Their eyes became slightly dull. No one had expected the battle between Nie Tian and Yunzong to go this far. Yunzong, you asked for it. Don't blame me. Nie Tian's expression was calm. His eyes didn't show fear, but cold killing intent. He didn't want to use the heaven-shrouding totem at first, but Yunzong's strength had exceeded his expectations. It seemed like he had to use it. Heaven-shrouding totem, come out! Nie Tian let out a loud roar. With a shake of his body, the 9-fold chaos beast disappeared and was replaced by endless star power. It turned into boundless starlight and shone brightly in the void.